Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku mastered the power of the 10 Shadows Part 2. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 3, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝗵𝗃 from Wattpad. So let's start the video. Third person POV, outside fake city Delta. With 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was ready. He would make sure that he was one of the first through the gate the moment it opened. With the way that Homeless Hero had phrased it, there were probably only a limited number of robots in each battle center. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looked around him once again. He took notice of a few other individuals there with him. A young man with bright red hair and sharp teeth caught 𝗧𝗵𝗲's eye. He seemed to be pumping himself up. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 saw him muttering to himself and then watched as he smashed his fists against each other. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 noticed his hands seemed to harden as they made contact, but he wouldn't pay too much attention to it. He also saw a strange boy with blonde hair and blue eyes meandering around and touching people. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 wasn't sure what his deal was, so he decided that he would keep his distance. He couldn't help but think back to what 𝗵𝗃𝗃 had said. There was a strict time limit to this test as well. Meaning, using what he was given by the disheveled and exhausted hero and the information 𝗵𝗃𝗃 gave them in the orientation, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was able to deduce that this entire thing might be some sort of layered exam. It was supposed to be the most difficult hero course entry exam in Japan, so of course there would be more to it than just a simple battle. He couldn't help but wonder if that was the case for that 0-pointer as well. Either way, that didn't matter for now. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, I just need to focus on getting enough points to enter into the hero course. The classes aren't separated by skill level or ability. So, as long as the hobo wants me in his class, if he even has a class, then I'll be in it. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 thought to himself. He watched as the massive gates began to open, and he took his opportunity. While everyone else was still waiting for some sort of signal to tell them to begin, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 simply ran past them, rushing into the battle center without any competition. Random examinee 1. What the hell? That's cheating. Random examinee 2. He didn't say go yet. What are you doing? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 could hear the complaints of some of the examinees who hadn't realized the exam started the moment the gates opened. He almost wanted to look back when he heard 𝗵𝗃𝗃's voice echoing throughout the battle center via a PH system, the hero's words confirming what 𝗧𝗵𝗲 had theorized. 𝗵𝗃𝗃, what's wrong? There are no countdowns in a real battle. 𝗵𝗃𝗃 announced the start had already happened. Run, run. The die has been cast, you know. What are you all waiting for? After hearing 𝗵𝗃𝗃 speak, the others turned to look at 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and the black and white wolves that had materialized from, seemingly, nowhere. The moss-haired boy was already charging deeper into the battle center, getting farther and farther away from the starting gate and closer to where a large amount of villain robots would be. After a split second, the realization dawned on the examinees still loitering around, and they began to rush through the gate as well. Each examinee made a mad dash to get in front of the other. 𝗳𝗵𝗲𝗃𝗃. A few minutes earlier outside Fake City Beta, with 𝗧𝗵𝗲 stood shakily outside of the gate and near the back of the crowd of examinees who would share the battle center with her for the exam. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 could hear them talking amongst themselves, remarking how amazing UH was as a school and the numerous battle centers the size of multiple city blocks. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 could feel the anxiety and fear beginning to take hold of her once again. Looking around at the various individuals and their quirks, if they were visible, she could see that people brought equipment and gear to assist them as well. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, mock battles? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 thought hesitantly. She looked around again and could see the confidence most of the examinees were exuding, a level of confidence that she didn't have. How are they all so confident? Aren't they nervous at all? Some of them even have equipment to go with their quirks, just like 𝗧𝗵𝗲 does. I should have brought something, shouldn't I? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 thought to herself as she continued to scan the group of examinees. Once again 𝗧𝗵𝗲 found her eyes trained on a girl with chestnut hair that was cut into a bob. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was pretty sure she had seen that girl talking with 𝗧𝗵𝗲 before she entered the orientation hall, and she looked nervous. Maybe if 𝗧𝗵𝗲 could talk to her, it would help them both calm down. She seemed like a nice person. After all, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 didn't really go out of his way to talk to anyone, especially not recently. 𝗬𝗍𝗵 had made up her mind and began to slowly make her way toward the girl. She walked stiffly and uncomfortably. She could only get a little bit closer before she felt a hand on her shoulder. The grip was strong, and 𝗬𝗍𝗵 slowly turned over her shoulder to see who grabbed her. 𝗬𝗍𝗵 was met with the stern and unfriendly stare of the boy with blue hair and glasses, the one who had reprimanded her during the orientation. 𝗬𝗍𝗵 jumped slightly at the realization that this boy was here as well. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗃𝗧 is here to... 𝗬𝗍𝗵 thought in a panic. That girl appears to be trying to focus, the boy with glasses said, after following 𝗬𝗍𝗵's line of sight and the direction she would have been going. What are you doing here? Are you taking the entrance exam to interfere with everyone else? The boy asked harshly. 𝗬𝗍𝗵, no, of course not, 𝗬𝗍𝗵 stammered as she pulled away from his grip. Some of the other examinees who were watching what was happening began to talk to one another, whispering and gossiping about the green-haired girl. Random examinee 1, isn't she the one who freaked out right inside the front gates? Random examinee 2, the one who winced after being called out? Random examinee 3, at the very least, we have one less rival to worry about, huh? 𝗬𝗍𝗵 could see their faces and knew exactly what they were thinking. Lucky for us. It crushed her spirit a little bit and made her even more downtrodden than she had been before. It was then that the entire group was interrupted by the sound of Present Mic's voice echoing throughout the area. Projected from PH speakers set up around the outside wall of the battle center as well as within. Present Mic, what's wrong? There are no countdowns in a real battle. Present Mic announced the start had already happened. Run, run. The die has been cast, you know. What are you all waiting for? Everyone turned over their shoulders to see the massive gates had opened while they weren't paying attention. As a result, while 𝗬𝗍𝗵 was still locked in her nervous thought spiral, the others began rushing in as well. It took 𝗬𝗍𝗵 less than a moment to realize what happened and began to make her way inside as well, moving as fast as she could. 𝗬𝗍𝗵 said, looking around, as everyone had already left. It then struck her, I am already behind. 𝗬𝗍𝗵 rushed through the gates, attempting to catch up with the already rapidly disappearing crowd of examinees. In Fake City Delta, with 𝗬𝗂𝗧 had already gotten a bit of a head start after making the most of the confusion about the start of the practical exam. He had made his way through the city streets, when all of a sudden, from a nearby alley a two-pointer appeared. The quadrupedal machine spun its head module around to look at 𝗬𝗂. 𝗬𝗂 watched as the red eye seemed to lock onto him, and he made the quick decision to allow Shiro and Kuma to rush from the sides to immobilize the robot and create an opening for 𝗬𝗂 to destroy its head with his tonfa. Two-pointer, target acquired. The robot spoke, looking at 𝗬𝗂 and rushing forward. I'll kill you. 𝗬𝗂 narrowed his eyes and clicked his tongue, the signal for the two nearby wolves to rush in as planned. Both Shiro and Kuma rushed in and lunged at the midsection of the robot. Its metal casing seemed to be made of a more fragile metal as the teeth of the wolves managed to rip through and secure themselves on some of the internal wiring. The 𝗬𝗵𝗿 had served their part, and now it was 𝗬𝗂's turn to take advantage of the opening he had been provided. 𝗬𝗂 quickly approached, and as he did, he readied his tonfa and imbued them with his quirk essence. It had become second nature for 𝗬𝗂 to imbue the strikes of his tonfa, as he had spent months doing it in an attempt to subjugate Nu. The deep blue aura-like glow surrounded his arms and the tonfa as he brought them down against the head of the two-pointer, destroying its processing unit and rendering it defeated. 𝗬𝗂 didn't get a break as he heard the sound of a wheel skidding against the pavement behind him. 𝗬𝗂 quickly turned over his shoulder to see the rapidly approaching figure of a one-pointer. 𝗬𝗂 quickly pushed his feet off of the body of the two-pointer and dodged the rapid approach of the one-pointer. The one-pointer, unable to change its trajectory, crashes into the still intact body of the two-pointer. 𝗬𝗂 called out to Shiro, and the white wolf quickly jumped and ripped the soft throat area of the one-pointer. Destroying the connections to the rest of the body from the head also rendered the one-pointer defeated. 𝗬𝗂, 3 points already, and it hasn't even been a minute. 𝗬𝗂 thought to himself before whistling and calling the 𝗬𝗵𝗿 back and returning them to his shadow. Nearby, A boy with a raven-like head and a dark, shadowy entity attached to his side watched in disguised interest. As he got distracted by watching as the two large wolves simply melted into a dark black ooze and joined with the green-haired boy's shadow, his quirk managed to fend off a sneak attack from behind. "Get your head in the game, 𝗵𝗲, the shadow entity bellowed. "𝗵𝗲, right? Apologies, dark shadow." 𝗵𝗲 responded. Izuku continued to rush forward, intending to try and reach his desired minimum amount of villain points before the halftime mark. Rapidly, Izuku rushed down an alley to get away from the main thoroughfare, where most of the other examinees were likely to gather to hope for robots to come to them. Izuku would go to the robots instead. SHADOWS. Third-person POV. A few hours prior to 𝗳𝗵𝗲 Municipal Beach Park, with All Might and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 gulped dryly. She had just swallowed the strand of hair All Might had handed to her. Even though she thought it was both gross and extremely weird, she wouldn't question the man who had essentially offered her everything and had changed her life. "All Might, all right? You swallowed the hair, right?" All Might asked, looking at the face the girl was making. "𝗧𝗵𝗲, I don't feel any different," though 𝗧𝗵𝗲 replied disappointed. She lifted her arms and looked for any noticeable difference in her body like she thought there might be. All Might burst into laughter at 𝗧𝗵𝗲's comment. "Of course not. What do you think the stomach does?" Turning to look at the nearby digital clock that displayed the time as 6:15 a.m., All Might continued, "Well, you'll feel something in 2 or 3 hours." "𝗧𝗵𝗲, I'm so nervous," 𝗧𝗵𝗲 replied with a sigh. "I need to hurry back, take a shower, and eat breakfast," 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said to herself as she grabbed her back and slung it over her shoulders. "All Might, you have become a proper vessel," All Might spoke, but it was one that was made in a hurry. "You didn't even get to take it for a test drive," All Might lamented, turning to look at 𝗧𝗵𝗲 in her eyes. "Prepare yourself for the physical repercussions it'll have on your body." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 hummed, looking at All Might confused. "All Might, I don't have time to explain in detail, so I'll just tell you this," All Might said, continuing to look at the girl. "When you use my quirk, One for All, squeeze your buttocks and yell this inside your heart's dashed present time in Fake City Beta. With 𝗧𝗵𝗲, one-pointer smashes through a wall nearby and pulls 𝗧𝗵𝗲 out of her thoughts as her feet continue to beat against the pavement below her. As soon as 𝗧𝗵𝗲 saw the robot, she froze in place. Gasping in shock and struggling to move herself, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 found her feet locked in place. "𝗧𝗵𝗲, a one-pointer!" 𝗧𝗵𝗲 shouted internally. She watched as its eye focused on her and it spoke. "It's coming! It's coming! It's coming! Why won't my feet move?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲 began to panic as the one-pointer rapidly approached and raised one of its arms to strike down on the girl. A blast of light managed to save her just in time. A nearby examinee with oddly styled hair and a frilly white shirt stood in an odd pose. The boy had moved his hips forward and from the odd belt around his waist, he fired a bright laser that destroyed the one-pointer before it could hit the green-haired girl. "Thanks for distracting it," the boy shouted. "𝗧𝗵𝗲, a laser?" 𝗧𝗵𝗲 muttered to herself as she looked at the boys standing nearby. "Merci. We make a good team," the boy said, looking at 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and smiling strangely, "but I don't think we'll meet again. Adieu." The boy flashed 𝗧𝗵𝗲 a two-finger salute before running away down a side street. "𝗧𝗵𝗲, we won't meet again." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 repeated the phrase, confused. "Present mic. 6 minutes and 2 seconds left." Present mic's voice cut through 𝗧𝗵𝗲's questions and caught her attention immediately. The exam was already almost half over, and she still hadn't gained a single point. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looked around her at the nearby destruction from the fights that had taken place here earlier and the most recent one-pointer attack. "𝗧𝗵𝗲, oh no. Oh no." 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said to herself as she began to run as fast as she could, searching for any of the villain robots for points. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 rushed past destroyed robots lying on the ground in various states of disrepair. Some had been completely demolished, while others had been hit precisely enough to cause them to stop moving without completely destroying the robots. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 kept passing by the corpses of the destroyed robots and eventually made her way back to the main street and gasped in shock. The main street had been littered with the destroyed remnants of the robots. most of which had already been defeated and were left in smoking, smoldering heaps of twisted metal and circuitry. 𝗍𝗵𝗲 looked around attempting to find anything, when she saw the girl with the brown bob running around. 𝗍𝗵𝗲, it's her. The girl I was going to talk to. 𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought to herself as she watched the girl touch robots with her hands. After the girl's hands made contact, the robots began to float into the air, until she pressed her fingers together and muttered something 𝗍𝗵𝗲 couldn't hear. 𝗍𝗵𝗲 watched in disbelief as the robots fell back to the earth with a massive thud and broke apart. Brown-haired girl, phew, that's 28 points. The girl said assuredly. 𝗍𝗵𝗲, huh. 28. 𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought in shock. Until she watched the boy with glasses rush past her and slam his foot into the body of a two-pointer, destroying it. Blue-haired boy, 45 points, the boy said to himself. 𝗍𝗵𝗲, 45. 𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought horrified. She was falling further and further behind. Quickly, people all around 𝗍𝗵𝗲 were fighting for the scraps left over from the main force of the villain robots. 𝗍𝗵𝗲 stood, rooted in place as she looked around frantically. She searched for something, anything, but there was nothing for her. 𝗍𝗵𝗲, the number of enemies is decreasing fast. 𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought in a panic, oh no. In a nearby location, with a group of unknown individuals, the group paid close attention to the massive screen in front of them. On it, multiple cameras were showing various examinees as they passed through the practical exam. The group also listened to the light voice of the individual in charge. In this practical exam, the examinees have not been informed of the number of villains or their locations. A small, white mouse-like creature spoke. Its voice remained passive and calm as it narrated to the group. They have a limited amount of time in a vast area. As such, they have to draw the villains out from their hiding spots. The group watched closely at a few individuals on the screen as the creature continued to speak. Information gathering, the ability to understand the situation before anyone else. The monitor pulled up two students in particular. A girl with purple hair and long headphone jack-like appendages hanging from her earlobes. And a boy who seemed to have 6 arms. However, as they paid closer attention, the group could see the limbs splitting and changing into various other types of body parts, including eyes and ears. Mobility that can be used in many different circumstances. The monitor displayed the boy with blue hair and glasses as he slid to a stop. The engines on his calves poured out exhaust fumes as he recentered himself to dash once again. Discernment to be able to stay calm in any situation. The monitor displayed the tranquil and almost gloating presence of the blonde-haired boy with the laser quirk. He was once again posing, although strangely, he seemed to be looking directly into the camera that was monitoring him. Needless to say, it creeped a few of the gathered individuals out. Pure combat ability, the monitor displayed a boy with ash-blonde hair who was surrounded by the smoldering remains of a large group of villain robots. He was but had a massive, battle-lusted grin on his face as he spun around and immediately blasted explosions from his palms, sending him directly at a three-pointer who had been unfortunate enough to show itself near that examinee. And of course, strategy and resourcefulness. The screen showed a boy with moss-green hair who was currently running down one of the side alleys, flanked by a white and black wolf who had just finished ripping the missile launchers off of a three-pointer which the boy had used to shoot at a few other nearby villain robots. He had made his way away from the larger group to a more isolated area and had quickly dispatched most of the villains he came across. These basic abilities are what is needed to keep peace in the streets. The mouse-like creature continued to speak, have all been turned into points in this test. 2. Doesn't this year's group look promising? A female voice asked, opening up the room for others to speak up and give their input. 3. Well, we can't know for sure yet, another voice, a deep gruff male voice, responded. After all, their true test is yet to come. Exactly, said the white creature, as a button was uncovered and pressed. In Fake City Beta, with 𝗍𝗵𝗲, a block of buildings had just collapsed nearby, and debris had come cascading. Falling chunks of building landed on the street and other smaller buildings nearby, thoroughly wiping at least one block out in mere moments. 𝗍𝗵𝗲 watched as the cloud of dust rose into the air and heard the trembling of the ground beneath her. She heard electrical wires snap and go whipping through the air. Everyone around turned their attention to the sudden explosion, immediately taking their attention away from the other examinees nearby and the few villain robots who had begun to retreat. The examinees gasped as they turned to look at the massive looming shadow that had appeared with the explosion. Its shadow was so large that it cast the examinees in shadow as it blocked out the sunlight. In Fake City Delta, with 𝗧𝗵𝗲 watched from a rooftop he had managed to reach, using the fire escape of another nearby building. He simply looked down on the other examinees who were still trying to gather points. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 had already reached 37 points and didn't deem it necessary to get more. He knew that the hobo would have been watching. It was just as he was about to make his way to a different spot when the explosion happened. It was still a good distance away from him, but he could see the destruction that the massive robot had caused. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, what the F? That thing is bigger than most of these buildings. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 thought in shock as he looked at the looming figure of the zero-pointer. That thing is the zero-pointer. No wonder they told us to just run away from it. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 looked on for a moment before deciding to do something. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 took a few steps back from the ledge and clasped his hands together in the form of a bird. And, as 𝗧𝗵𝗲 took his few steps and jumped, a large bird-like creature emerged from his back in shadow and gripped his shoulders with its talons. Beating its wings and taking flight, Nu kept 𝗧𝗵𝗲 off of the ground but allowed him to make his way toward the exit. In Fake City Beta, with 𝗧𝗵𝗲, isn't it a little too big? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked herself as she watched the zero-pointer's hand crush the side of a building, sending debris tumbling toward the ground. The zero-pointer didn't delay, as it reeled back and sent its fist into the street below, aiming at the examinees. The impact of the zero-pointer's fist was enough to cause a massive cloud of dust to kick up and the nearby area to shake with tremors. The examinees braced themselves against the massive shockwave that followed the strike, covering their faces to try and keep their vision clear and somewhat usable. It didn't take long for the massive group of hero wannabes to turn tail and begin running away. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 found herself frozen in place, unable to move despite her better judgment telling her every sense and muscle to run, to flee from the certain death that awaited if she lingered there for any longer. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 fell onto her backside as she tried to turn in place. Her feet wouldn't respond to her and as such her legs gave way from under her. She stared up at the massive figure of the zero-pointer and her body continued to shake. Her hands trembled as she tried to push them against the asphalt, to move away from there in any way she possibly could. She was surrounded on all sides by the other examinees, running and fleeing, just leaving her there, essentially to die. Inside the observation room, with Toshinori and the other teachers Toshinori, an overwhelming threat, Toshinori thought as he watched the screen displaying the green-haired girl he spent the last 10 months with, working daily. How people act after they've seen this shows their true nature, Toshinori thought as he watched all of the other examinees from Fake City Beta running past 𝗧𝗵𝗲, who had collapsed on the ground and was struggling to flee and get away. Some even looked at her but continued to run. But in Fake City Beta, with 𝗧𝗵𝗲, this isn't funny. I have to run away. I'll get points as I run. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said to herself as she scrambled on her hands and knees to get away. She still couldn't get her feet under her. Shoot, shoot, shoot. I'm still at 0 points. Present mic. Less than 2 minutes left. Present mic's voice echoed throughout the battle centers. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, less than 2 minutes. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 asked, shocked and bewildered. It'll be wasted. Everything All Might gave me. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 began to panic as tears formed in the corners of her eyes. It will all be wasted. Brown-haired girl? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 heard a female voice call out from behind her. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 froze, unable to continue fleeing. Slowly, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 turned over her shoulder to look behind her at the girl with brown hair. She was trapped. Her ankle had been trapped by some of the debris that had fallen and she couldn't get away. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, 𝗬𝗧𝗵𝗲. No, she can't get out. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 thought in horror as the zero-pointer continued to advance. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 didn't wait any longer. Her body moved for her. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 got to her feet and rushed toward the zero-pointer, not thinking of her own safety at all. Knowing that someone needed to be saved, 𝗧𝗵𝗲's body flew into action of its own accord, and nothing she could do would be able to stop it now. Inside the observation room, with Toshinori and the other teachers Toshinori, there is absolutely no merit in taking on that faux villain, Toshinori thought as he watched the girl rush forward like she had before. But that creates the opportunity for it to shine brightly. In Fake City Beta, with 𝗬𝗍𝗵 as 𝗬𝗍𝗵 continued to run forward, something happened. There was an odd feeling in her legs as she pushed off of the ground, sending herself flying into the air and causing an airstream that blew away a portion of the rising dust cloud. Inside the observation room, with Toshinori and the other teachers Toshinori, and rise to the surface. Toshinori finished his thought as he and the other assembled teachers watched closely as on two screens, two different green-haired individuals were bravely making their way into the heat of things with the zero-pointer. In Fake City Beta, with 𝗬𝗍𝗵 was still flying through the air as she brought her fist back and readied it, channeling that same feeling that flowed through her legs just a moment ago, into the arm and balled-up fist, as she recalled what All Might had told her earlier that morning. All Might, in 𝗬𝗍𝗵's mind, so squeeze your buttocks and yell this 𝗬𝗍𝗵 with all might, from inside your heart, 𝗬𝗍𝗵 thought as she continued to rapidly approach the massive zero-pointer robot. She was quickly approaching its face, and she wasn't showing any signs of slowing down. 𝗬𝗍𝗵, 𝗬𝗵𝗃. 𝗬𝗍𝗵 shouted within her mind as she reached the head of the zero-pointer. She punched forward with all of her might and the front of the zero-pointer caved in on itself from the power behind the strike. Smash! The zero-pointer was blown backward by the strength of the blow. The pressure descended the large machine as its joints were blown away in mild explosions. The air continued to ripple as the shockwave from 𝗬𝗍𝗵's punch cleared the main street and nearby area of the dust that the zero-pointer had kicked up during its rampage. 𝗬𝗍𝗵 seemed to hang in the air for a few moments, and for those few moments, 𝗬𝗍𝗵 felt as if she could conquer the world. The girl who had been trapped stared up with wide eyes, and the other examinees on Fake City Beta stood with their mouths agape at the display of absolute power they had just witnessed. In the observation room, with Toshinori and the other teachers, Toshinori couldn't help but grin. He did his best to hide it from the others around him, but he was so proud of the girl. She had come a long way, and yet again had proved to him exactly why she was the inheritor of his power, the torch, one for all. Toshinori, that's right. It rises to the surface the most important qualification of a hero, the spirit of self-sacrifice. Toshinori thought to himself, but his train of thought was interrupted when another teacher brought their attention back to the screen, more specifically, the screen that showed Izuku. Oh. 2. Hey, another student is going toward the zero-pointer at Fake City Delta, the woman with purple hair called out. Indeed, on another screen, they could see a boy in a dark blue jumper as he was being held by the shoulders by a large orange-feathered bird-like creature. The bird-like creature was flying low near the pavement. They saw as he got low enough, the feathered creature dropped the boy before flying toward the zero-pointer on its own. 𝗬𝗵𝗃, what might he be doing? The white mouse-like creature pondered aloud. Third-person POV. A few minutes earlier, after the release of the zero-pointers in Fake City Delta, with Izuku had just been carried off by Nu, heading toward the main thoroughfare to be closer to the main gate. Izuku had absolutely no intentions of attempting to fight with that monstrous thing. After all, there was no point to it anyway. Izuku had scored plenty of points and he felt confident about his general performance. Present Mike had just announced that they had under 2 minutes, and Izuku was making his way without issue toward the main gate of the battle center. But that was when he heard it. It was faint, almost imperceptible over the loud noises surrounding him and the chaos going on with the raging zero-pointer. But perhaps because Nu had caught it first, Izuku noticed it as well. A plea, a desperate plea for help from someone behind him. Izuku now had to make a decision, and although he wasn't someone who willingly wanted to be seen as a savior or hero, figured that the right thing for him to do was to make sure whoever called for help was safe, at the very least. Izuku, right, good people don't deserve to suffer. These are all good kids and I can't let them be hurt even further. Izuku thought to himself. His resolve to save others had never really found itself ingrained in his mind or morals. Izuku just wanted to make sure that people who didn't deserve the suffering they endured didn't have to continue suffering. just like 𝗬𝗵𝗲 and 𝗵𝗃. Izuku had Nu turn around to begin flying toward the voice that had called for help. Having Nu fly low enough to the ground that Issei could see where he would land and where the voice called from. After spotting its source, a girl with orange hair tied into a ponytail, Izuku had Nu drop him near the ground and ordered the Shikigami to fly toward the head and sensors of the zero-pointer. Izuku, KeiKei, are you okay? Izuku shouted above the noise, attempting to confirm whether the girl needed help or not. Orange-haired girl, yeah. My arm is stuck though, and I can't get it out. The girl replied. She seemed to be more concerned about the still approaching zero-pointer. Izuku, right? Izuku responded, looking at the rubble that trapped her arm in place. It had buried her up to the shoulder, although how that happened Izuku wasn't entirely sure. I'm not nearly strong enough to take care of this, but I think Shiro and Kuma can help. Izuku thought as he looked at the largest piece of debris. The one that was likely preventing the girl from freeing herself. The girl watched in confusion as the boy stepped back and looked up toward the zero-pointer. Nu had managed to fly up to the head of the zero-pointer and was currently just being a general nuisance, flying in such a way that it prevented the zero-pointer from being able to accurately see the surroundings through its lenses. Nu flapped its wings once again and a spark of electricity jumped from the bird-like creature to the zero-pointer's head, causing the lights to flicker for a moment. Izuku had clasped his hands together to form the seal for the divine dogs. The orange-haired girl watched in surprise as two wolves, one white and one black, formed themselves from the boy's shadow. Divine dogs. Izuku quickly grabbed a hold of the largest piece of rubble and the two wolves came to assist as best as they could, using their snouts to provide extra effort on the piece of debris. After a few seconds of strenuous effort, and with the help of Shiro and Kuma, Izuku manages to push off the large piece of rubble, allowing the ginger-haired girl to free her arm. Izuku looked back up once again and saw the effect that Nu's electrical ability had against the massive robot and decided to have the bird attempt it again. This time with a proper pass. As Izuku dismissed the two divine dogs and assisted the girl, he helped to gain some distance from the zero-pointer. Nu gained some distance of its own before flying straight at the head of the zero-pointer and discharging a massive amount of electricity. Izuku watched as once again, the lights on the zero-pointer flickered and dimmed. The two electrical attacks had done quite a number to the zero-pointer's processor, as the robot began to move slower and slower, seemingly struggling to properly judge the placement of its limbs. Izuku continued to move away as he heard the sounds of a large explosion coming from what was likely a different fake city. Izuku continued to move forward, now not supporting the girl, as she assured him she could walk on her own. Izuku recalled Nu as well, as the bird flew closer and eventually dissipated in the dark black ooze which joined with Izuku's shadow once again. Izuku continued to create distance between himself and the zero-pointer, completely unaware that it had been put out of commission with Nu using very pointed strikes empowered by an electrical charge. In the observation room, with Toshinori and the other teachers, it seems this generation has some real promise, the mouse-like creature spoke, rubbing its paws in its lap. Well, he told me he would and he did good job, kid. I'll see you in my class. A man with dark, unkempt hair and a scruffy 5 o'clock shadow on his face. Toshinori. Wait, she still needs to come down, Toshinori thought in terror as he turned his attention back to the screen displaying Izumi, who was still floating in the air it seemed. SHADOWS. Third-person POV, in Fake City Beta, with Izumi. Izumi felt her body weightless as she remained suspended in midair. Her thoughts went back to when this happened the first time. Izumi, the conditions are the same as when I tried to save Kaken, Izumi thought to herself. But it's different. This time, Izumi paused as she watched the zero-pointer completely collapse to the ground. Defeated. Present mic. Less than 1 minute left. Present mic announced the incoming end of the exam. Present mic's voice brought Izumi back to reality. As she blinked for a moment, then she felt the sensation of falling. Free falling. The wind blew past her face as her body began to plummet rapidly toward the earth once again. Izumi could do nothing but scream in terror as she began to completely plummet. She was falling face-first toward the ground and she could see it getting closer and closer. Izumi, Wait, this is All Might's power, 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 realized as she watched the ground get closer with each passing millisecond. I'm able to jump this high now. Landing should be a piece of cake, a piece of cake, cake, cake. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 couldn't collect her thoughts, as the pain from her broken limbs came all at once, almost inducing a state of shock. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 turned over her shoulder to look at her legs and arm. They were shattered, completely broken and useless. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲's arm was a deep purple and was bent at extremely unnatural angles. The pain had only just caught up with her, but she realized that she had broken her limbs by using one for all. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 let out a 𝗵𝗃𝗃 wail from the pain she felt as she continued to plummet. She could hear All Might's words from this morning echoing in her mind. All Might, in 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲's mind, you have become a proper vessel, but it was one that was made in a hurry. Prepare yourself for the physical repercussions it'll have on your body. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲, oh yeah. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought as she gritted her teeth and tried to prevent the tears from spilling out of her eyes. I'm such an idiot. A mere 10 months was just barely enough time. I can just barely hold this borrowed power. I was being conceited for a second. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 chastised herself and her decisions. Now looking to the sky, she watched a few droplets of her tears float upwards with the inertia. I've only been given the right to stand at the starting line. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 grunted in pain as she continued to think. Now she began to use her analytical mind to find a way to slow her momentum enough so that she could survive the fall. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲, think. What to do, what to do. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought rapidly, going through any possible way to save herself while also remaining fit enough to get at least some points. She then realized, a detriate smash. If I aim that move at the ground. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲's panicked thoughts were becoming more and more skittish as she watched the ground come closer and closer. Both my legs and my right arm are broken. I only have my left arm now. And the timing, 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 continued to think, her mind going a million miles a second to try and come up with any possible way to get out of this alive. If I'm even a moment too early or too late, I'll die. And even if I succeed, I still won't have any points. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought to herself as she readied her left arm to punch toward the ground. If I break my left arm, there's no way I'll pass. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 continued to fall, ready and waiting for just the right moment to use All Might's quirk to keep herself alive, at the very least. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲's eyes widened as she continued to fall. The ground was getting so close she thought she could make out the porous surface of the asphalt that made up the road. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 let out a scream in preparation as she started to see her shadow appear on the ground below. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 was just about to use it when all of a sudden slap. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 continued to fall but stopped, just a few feet above the ground. A bright red mark on her cheek from where she had been smacked, but she was alive. Nearby, the brown-haired girl laid on a floating piece of a robot. She had managed to smack 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 with all 5 of her fingers before the girl had hit the ground. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 gasped in surprise as she felt herself weightless once again, however very, very close to the ground. Looking around her, 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 saw the girl floating above her press her hands together, and heard her say release. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 and the girl fell to the ground, safe and alive. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 couldn't move any of her limbs besides her left arm, and the girl appeared to be vomiting. As much as she tried to hold it in, the girl got sick and upchucked her breakfast on the asphalt. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 just curled onto herself and attempted to move. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲, I am safe, 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 said hoarsely. No, she saved me, 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought as she lifted her head up to look at the girl with brown hair. Is she all right? She looks uninjured, at least I'm so glad. And 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 slammed her left fist on the ground and proceeded to attempt to drag herself forward, trying to get at least 1 point. Thank you. If I can just get 1 point, 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 struggled to say as she pushed her broken body forward with pure drive and a single intact limb. Present mic, time's up. Present mic announced, followed by the sound of a loud klaxon ringing throughout the battle centers. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 couldn't take it. She had lost her one opportunity, and her consciousness as well. In Fake City Beta, with 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲, the other examinees from Fake City Beta who were nearby looked at the broken girl lying on the pavement. Her legs sprawled out and limp behind her, in ways that could only be described as disturbing. Her right arm was completely destroyed and twisted at odd angles that had to be extremely painful. Examinee 1, what was that girl? Examinee 2, she just suddenly jumped at the obstacle. Examinee 3, she seemed to have a reinforcement type quirk, but that was unusual. Examinee 2, but if she had such an amazing quirk, what kind of life did she live that made her so jumpy? Examinee 4, maybe she was acting to trick others. Examinee 3, but it doesn't look like she gained anything from doing so. Examinee 1, anyway, there's no mistaking that she's an amazing girl. Behind the group of examinees who were discussing amongst themselves, stood a boy with blue hair and glasses. He clenched his fist and gritted his teeth as he looked back upon the broken body of the green-haired girl he had reprimanded earlier. Blue-haired boy, tisk. They're missing the point, he thought to himself, didn't they see? She jumped out to save that girl. The boy with blue hair looked at the girl who had collapsed from exhaustion atop a piece of a different robot before turning back to look at Izumi. She was aware of the remaining time, of her own safety, and the points she needed to pass, and even so, she did not hesitate at all. The young man clenched his jaw as he thought back to how he simply ran past the girl while looking at her, stuck and frozen in place. He remembers seeing how terrified she was, and he just kept running past. If we had not been in an exam, the boy thought to himself, shaking slightly, of course, I would have done the same thing. The boy thought, attempting to reassure himself of his own heroism. Wait, exam. The boy stopped as he realized something, of course. Wait a minute. The boy was beginning to unravel something when the sounds of tapping from behind him pulled him out of his thoughts. Okay, good work, the voice of an elderly woman spoke, as the taps of a cane continued to approach. Good work, good work. The woman, dressed in a nurse's outfit with a visor, a syringe hair accessory, and carrying a cane designed like a syringe, spoke as she dug through her coat pockets and held her hand out to a nearby examinee. Here you go. Here are some gummies for you. Eat some gummies. Examinee, thanks. The boy she handed the gummies to stammered his thanks as he bowed and stepped out of the woman's way. Yes, you too, she responded simply and continued walking forward. Blonde-haired laser boy, that mademoiselle is the backbone of 𝗬𝗍𝗄, the oddly fancy boy said, pointing out the older newcomer. Oh dear, you were hurt this much by your own quirk, she said as she stepped up to Izumi's mangled body on the tarmac. It's as if her body isn't used to her quirk yet, the older woman thought as she looked at Izumi's broken body. The older woman then proceeded to pucker her lips and kiss Izumi on the forehead. Everyone around was sent for a shock after watching that. Examinee 2, what was that? A boy nearby asked. Blonde-haired laser boy, 𝗬𝗍𝗄𝐻's licensed school nurse, the boy explained, the youthful heroine, recovery girl. Those nearby watched as a strange line-colored light surrounded the girl's broken limbs. After a few moments, they watched as the limbs began to correct themselves, and as Izumi's right arm returned to its normal color from the sickly deep purple it had become. Blonde-haired laser boy, her quirk is the superactivation of the body's healing ability. 𝗬𝗍𝗄𝐻 can only go through with such a reckless entrance exam because of her. Recovery girl, let's finish this quickly. Is anyone else injured? Recovery girl turned her attention to the rest of the examinees. Blue-haired boy, I see. If this exam is set up like that, the boy thought as he watched on. Then she's 𝗳𝗵𝗲𝗄𝐻. Third-person POV, 1 week later in the Midoriya household, with Izumi and Izuku, the three green-haired individuals sat around the dining room table. Izuku and Inko had been eating, or at least Izuku had. Inko had been cautiously taking bites of her food while keeping a concerned eye on Izumi. The girl hadn't been acting like herself this past week, ever since she took the entrance exam. She would space out and not listen more often, probably a result of built-up stress. Izumi, at the moment, was staring at her baked fish. She held it in her chopsticks but made no motion to eat it. She simply stared at it with a hollow look in her eyes. Inko, Izumi? Inko asked, only to get no response. Izumi? Inko asked again, this time a little louder. Izumi blinked slowly and looked up. The dark bags under her eyes from her restless nights these past few days dulled the once vibrant green color of her eyes. Inko, hey, are you all right? 𝗵𝗃 asked, concerned that 𝗬𝗵𝗲 still hadn't answered. Why are you smiling at the fish like that, sweetie? 𝗬𝗵𝗲, oh sorry. I'm fine. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 replied, coming to her senses completely and beginning to eat. 𝗵𝗃 could only look closer with a hint of skepticism at 𝗬𝗵𝗲's response. Something was wrong and 𝗵𝗃 knew it. It had to have something to do with 𝗳𝗃𝗁, but with Izuku as calm as he was, she didn't know what it could be. Izuku, I heard she struggled to get a single point but she completely took down the 0-pointer, unlike me. Izuku thought to himself as he finished his meal. Thank you for dinner, Auntie, Izuku said before going to the sink to deposit his dishes. The boy then made his way to his room to relax and await the results. Meanwhile, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 sat on the couch and absent-mindedly squeezed her grip trainer, holding her phone in her other hand as she just stared off into the distance. 𝗬𝗵𝗲, from self-scoring, I know that I just barely passed the written exam, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 thought as she stared off into space. But that was cancelled out by the big fat 0 in the practical exam. Plus, ever since the entrance exam, I haven't been able to contact All Might. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 let out a sigh, which 𝗵𝗃 heard from nearby. The woman had used her quirk to pull a nearby binder to her. When she heard 𝗬𝗵𝗲's sigh, she turned over her shoulder to try and offer the most reassuring words she could think of. 𝗵𝗃, the results should arrive today or tomorrow, right? 𝗵𝗃 said, trying her best to lighten the mood. 𝗬𝗵𝗲, yes, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 replied, dejected. 𝗵𝗃, geez, I think it's amazing that you even applied to 𝗬𝗏𝗡s. 𝗵𝗃 said, trying to share her pride in her daughter. 𝗬𝗵𝗲, right? 𝗬𝗵𝗲's reply was simple, almost as if she hadn't even heard what 𝗵𝗃 had said. Izuku, man, 𝗬𝗵𝗲's a wreck. She keeps looking at her phone longingly too, Izuku thought as he came out of his room to grab something to drink. And Auntie is trying her best, but nothing seems to be getting through to 𝗬𝗵𝗲. 𝗬𝗵𝗲, I don't want Mom to worry, so I didn't even tell her what happened with All Might. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 thought as she looked at 𝗵𝗃, who was near the door putting on her slippers. I'll keep this secret so he can continue being the symbol of peace. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 let out a resigned sigh as she kept squeezing her grip trainer. There's no way I could tell anyone, not even my family. Well, except for Izuku, but that's because he already vaguely knows. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 set her phone on the coffee table and reached down for the dumbbell by her feet. She proceeded to curl the weight to just pass the time and help her clear her mind. The exercise had become something like therapy for 𝗬𝗵𝗲, and it helped her continue to feel something at least. 𝗬𝗵𝗲, All Might, after you saw potential in me, I'm sorry I didn't live up to it. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 thought resignedly as she continued to curl the weight. But I did what I thought was right. All Might, you. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 was taken out of her thoughts when she heard the sound of rapid footfalls leading to the living room door. 𝗵𝗃 had rushed into the room, scrambling on the floor as she hurried into the living room. She was holding 2 envelopes in her hand. 𝗵𝗃, 𝗳𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍. 𝗵𝗃 stammered as she entered the living room. 𝗳𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍 and Izuku. They're here. They came. They're here. 𝗵𝗃 shouted as she held out the 2 envelopes. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 could see that one was addressed to Izuku and one was addressed to her. Both of them were from 𝗬𝗏𝗡, and 𝗬𝗵𝗲 could only look with a sense of dread as she heard Izuku's door open. Izuku made his way down the hall and into the living room with 𝗵𝗃 and 𝗬𝗵𝗲. Looking around, Izuku took a seat on the couch and looked at 𝗵𝗃, who was standing in front of the coffee table and sofa. Izuku, Auntie? Izuku asked, cautious. 𝗵𝗃, the letters from 𝗬𝗏𝗡 are here. 𝗵𝗃 shouted in response. Izuku could only reply simply. A few minutes later, 𝗵𝗃 stood in the hallway, pacing outside of her 2 children's doors. She was much more concerned about 𝗬𝗵𝗲 and what her daughter's reaction would be. But to say that she wasn't also nervous for her nephew and adopted son, Izuku, would be a lie. They both had seemingly worked so hard in order to be able to attend 𝗬𝗏𝗡, and she would have to be there as a support if either one of them didn't end up making the cut. In 𝗬𝗵𝗲's room, with 𝗬𝗵𝗲 sat, staring at the unopened envelope sitting on her desk. She didn't want to open it, she was afraid. She was scared of the rejection she knew was coming. She just wanted to delay it for as long as physically possible. Eventually, however, the tension became too much for the girl. In a sudden burst of grit and determination, 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 reached out for the envelope and ripped it open. From inside, a small disc fell onto her desk. The disc activated and a projection of All Might in a yellow suit appeared before her. All Might, recording, I am here as a projection. All Might announced, his face close to the camera, and took up the entirety of the holographic projection. All Might's sudden appearance and his loud, boisterous voice startled 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 a little bit, as this wasn't what she was expecting. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲, wah? All Might? 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 asked, confuddled. Wait, this is from you, right? So 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 looked from the torn envelope in her hand to the hologram being projected in front of her. All Might, recording, I had to do some paperwork that took some time, so I couldn't contact you. All Might explained with a shrug before he bowed. I'm sorry. Actually, I came to this town to work at UA. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲, huh? All Might is working at UA? 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 asked the hologram in surprise. All Might, All Might responded. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 could see a hand waving in the corner telling All Might to wrap this up. What is it? Wrap it up. But there is something I must talk to her about. All Might paused and looked off to the side, likely to the owner of the hand. It'll push everything else back. All right. All Might conceded. All Might then nodded and began again. Even if you passed the written exam, you got 0 points on the practical exam. Of course, that means you didn't pass, All Might said, his word cut through 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 like a knife. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲, I know, 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought to herself as she gripped onto her pajama bottoms. I knew that from the beginning, but it's so frustrating. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 could feel the tears prickling at the corner of her eyes. All Might, if that was all there was to it? All Might continued unexpectedly, causing 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 to look up in surprise. I am an entertainer as well. First, take a look at this video. All Might said before turning to a nearby screen with a controller in his hand. All Might clicked a button and a video began to play on the screen. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 could see the girl she had saved, the one with her chestnut brown hair cut into a bob. The girl was back in her middle school uniform and was at the doorway of one of the many classrooms of UA. Brown-haired girl. On screen, excuse me, the girl stammered as she began to speak. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲, that girl? 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 asked aloud. All Might, she came to negotiate directly in person after the exam. All Might provided commentary. Negotiate what? All Might leaned in with a finger and posed the mystery to 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲. Keep watching to find out. Brown-haired girl, on screen, I'm the girl with curly hair and freckles, do you know who I'm talking about? She asked. A little plain-looking. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲, me. She's talking about me. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought as her eyes widened. Brown-haired girl, on screen, is it possible for me to give her some of my points? The girl asked. I heard her say, if I can just get 1 point, so I thought maybe she was still at 0 points. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 was stunned. She couldn't help but hear the echoing voice of Katsuki calling her useless. Brown-haired girl, on screen, at least the points she lost because of me. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 heard the voice of the pro hero, 𝗳𝗲𝗵𝗲, as he scolded her for rushing into a dangerous situation to save her childhood friend, her only friend. Brown-haired girl, she saved me, the girl shouted. She then proceeded to beg, please, please, please. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 slowly stood from her desk chair. She didn't know what to say or think. She just didn't know anything, it seems. All Might, projection, in addition to now having a quirk, All Might said, his back turned to the camera, your actions have spurred others to act. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 smiled to herself, before looking back down at her lap with a dejected sigh. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲, at least I was able to do something. I was able to help someone. That's more than I could ever do before, 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought as she waited for the bad news to come. All Might, the entrance exam the other day was not graded, only on villain points. All Might explained, looking at the camera over his shoulder. The recording of the brown-haired girl resumed, showing Present Mike talking to the girl. Present Mike, on screen, even if you ask to, you cannot give him your points? Present Mike responded to the girl. He then reached out and patted the girl on the head as he continued, anyway, there's no reason to give her any, female listener. All Might, how can a hero course reject people who save others and do the right thing? All Might posed the rhetorical question, call that lip service. Bring it on. All Might announced, looking back at the camera. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 simply watched with bated breath as the hologram continued to play. All Might, this is a job that requires risking one's life to put that lip service into practice. All Might paused for a moment before something else showed up on the screen behind him. Rescue points. And they're given by a panel of judges. It's the other basic ability we at you look at. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 watched with wide eyes as her name appeared in 8th place, just below her brother Izuku who claimed 6th place, and one other person who got one more point than her. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 had received a 0 for the villain points. However, she had received 60 rescue points. All Might, Midoriya 𝗬𝗵𝗲, 60 points. All Might declared, and 𝗬𝗲𝗄𝗃 𝗧𝗵𝗄, 45 rescue points. You both pass. 𝗬𝗵𝗲, this, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 said, her eyes welling up with tears, this is too crazy. All Might, come, young Midoriya, All Might said, extending a hand toward the camera, and toward 𝗬𝗵𝗲. At the same time in Izuku's room, with Izuku had opened the envelope as soon as he got back to his room. He didn't see any point in waiting for anything. Izuku, from the self-grading, I'm pretty sure I passed the written exam without any issue, and if what that hobo said is true, I'm pretty sure I got plenty of villain points as well. Izuku thought to himself as he took a seat at his desk. Izuku opened the envelope and watched as a small silver disc fell out from within. It didn't take very long for the recorded message to play. All Might, I am here as a projection. All Might said, loud and right in the camera, his face taking up the entirety of the projected image. Izuku, Jesus. Izuku shouted in response to the terrifying close-up of that man's face. What the hell? All Might, Midoriya Izuku, your display of prowess with your quirk and your quick thinking have shown to be a great asset. With your performance in the written exam being well above the passing margin, and with a solid base of 39 villain points, Midoriya Izuku, you have plenty of skill and ability enough to get into UA, but if fighting villains was all being a hero was about, then there would be no purpose to the other half of hero work. The saving of innocent lives. Throwing yourself into the face of danger to protect those around you. All Might went through his prepared speech. Izuku, is he talking about that ginger girl that I helped? Izuku wondered. All Might, here at UA, there is another type of point you can receive. These are given by a panel of judges, for acts of true heroism. Midoriya Izuku, your actions during the exam showed not only your ability with your quirk and your ability to remain calm in a strategic scenario but also your willingness to put yourself in harm's way for another, earning you a total of 25 rescue points. Izuku, rescue points? Izuku pondered. Izuku watched as the screen behind All Might lit up and displayed the rankings of the entrance exam. Izuku could see himself sitting nicely in 6th place. Just above his sister, 𝗬𝗵𝗲, who had received a total of 60 rescue points, but 0 villain points, and someone named Tengen, who beat 𝗬𝗵𝗲's score by 1 point. All Might, Midoriya Izuku, with 39 villain points and 25 rescue points you have passed. Welcome. All Might paused, extending his hand toward the camera, and toward Izuku. In 𝗬𝗵𝗲 and Izuku's bedrooms, with both siblings All Might, this is your hero academia. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 and Izuku, yes sir. SHADOWS. Shadows, 2 tents, divine dogs, 2 wolves, 1 white and 1 black which manifest from the wielder's shadow. Summoned by performing a wolf hand seal, or shadow puppet. Both are capable of tearing humans and animals apart with their fangs and devouring them. Each of the dogs can detect enemies and items and notify their 𝗵𝗃𝗃 when one is close. Their tracking abilities allow them to find lost allies and locations as well. New, a winged Shikigami armed with great speed and electric shock wings. Summoned by performing a bird hand seal, or shadow puppet. It can support its 𝗵𝗃𝗃 by carrying them while flying to increase their mobility and can attack with its heavy wings charged with electricity, shocking anyone it hits and leaving them temporarily paralyzed. It's especially effective for taking opponents posted in high places off guard or in combination attacks with other Shikigami. In addition to basic offensive applications, new speed and wings can also be used defensively to shield its 𝗵𝗃𝗃 from harm. Third-person POV. A few hours after the entrance exam inside a large room, with the 𝗬𝗏𝗃 teaching staff within a similar room to the one where the teachers watched the entrance and recommended exams, the teachers once again gathered to discuss the results of the entrance exam. Within the dark room, on a screen nearby, was projected the listing of scores from the entrance exams. The entirety of the top 10 scored at least 57 cumulative points, with only one who received no rescue points. The individual who received first place in the exam, Bakugo Katsuki, with an astounding 77 villain points and 0 rescue points. 1. The cumulative results for the practical exams are out and have been tallied and are out. One of the male teachers seated in the room exclaimed, looking at the projection on the screen. 2. I can't believe he got first place with no rescue points, a female teacher with dark purple hair said, dumbfounded. 3. The foe villains acquire their targets and draw close to them. Another male teacher explained. In the second half, as the others were slowing down, he used his flashy quirk to keep bringing them close and then counterattacking. It's the result of his toughness. 2. In contrast, the woman spoke again, the student in 8th place with 0 villain points and 60 rescue points. 1. There have been other examinees who took on the large 0-pointer in the past, even in this very exam with the student in 6th, but it's been a while since I last saw someone blow it away. The teacher exclaimed, excited. 4. But to suffer such a serious injury from her own attack, another male teacher chimed into the conversation, noting the girl's extreme and debilitating injuries that had been pulled up and displayed on the screen. It's like she's a young child whose quirk just manifested. Standing in the corner of the room was a man with shaggy, dark, unkempt hair that fell around his face in a messy mop. His eyes had dark bags underneath them, and he could really use a good shave. It seemed like he hadn't touched a razor in days. The teacher wore a dark black jumpsuit which hung around his body and hid his frame. He wore a long gray scarf that wrapped around his shoulders multiple times and hid the lower portion of his face. The man just narrowed his eyes as he looked at the girl's name, and the image of her body completely thrashed against the pavement. Hobo Hero, that girl, she's the one that problem child was telling me about. She was supposed to be quirkless, wasn't she? The man thought as he grunted in slight dissatisfaction with the result of her admission. But I'm glad that the boy was able to get in, and he managed to do pretty well for himself, strategically and efficiently disabling the 0-pointer, and saving another examinee at the same time. I should give him a call sometime soon. He hasn't reached out to me since he asked for the favor of getting those tonfa. Glad to see he used them as he told me he would. SHADOWS. Third-person POV. The night after receiving the acceptance letter at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, with Izumi and Toshinori. Izumi sprinted from her home the moment she received the message from All Might. She ran to their usual meeting place, and when she arrived she could see All Might standing on the clean, appealing beach sand under the moonlight. The man stood in his mini-might form as she had taken to calling it in her head. Izumi, finally he sent me a message. He told me to meet him at the beach. Where is he? Izumi rushed down the stairs to the sand and looked around. Quickly spotting the man she came to see, she called out to him. All Might. Toshinori had heard the sound of footsteps approaching rapidly and turned from his ocean gazing to look at the green-haired girl he had called out to meet him. He raised a hand in subtle hello, but that was all thrown out the window. She decided to shout All Might, coughing up a bit of BLD in surprise and sudden stress. He heard a few people nearby begin questioning. Toshinori, who's that? Toshinori sputtered through the BLD. 1. All Might, a man standing on the nearby pier shouted, looking toward where Izumi and Toshinori were standing. 2. No way, a woman with the man shouted as well. Where? Toshinori. Repeat after me. Toshinori whispered in a panic. I had the wrong person. Izumi, I had the wrong person. Izumi shouted, waving her hands over her head in a panic. Izumi's panicked shouts seemed to quell the nearby bystanders' curiosity in the pair, as they both began to complain quietly. 1. What? 2. I was hoping to see him. Letting out a sigh of relief, Izumi and Toshinori were able to relax. Taking a deep breath and regaining his composure, Toshinori lifted a hand to the girl, offering her a high five. "Toshinori, congrats on getting accepted," Toshinori said, holding his hand up for the girl. "Izumi, thank you very much." Izumi stuttered nervously as she reached up and gave Toshinori a high five. "Toshinori, just so you know," Toshinori began, resting his hands on his hips, "I didn't tell the school about my connection to you." Izumi responded, confused. "Toshinori, you're the type that would think that's cheating, right?" Toshinori said bluntly, looking at the girl with a smile. "I wasn't one of the judges." Toshinori shrugged, looking at the girl. "Izumi, thank you for your concern," Izumi said as she bowed in gratitude to Toshinori. "That was until she realized something, but I was surprised to find out that you were a teacher at UA. So that's why you came here?" Izumi asked, excited at the prospect of learning directly from her mentor and idol in a traditional hero school setting. "I mean, your agency is in Roppongi in Minato, Tokyo." Toshinori, "Stop that." Toshinori chastised the girl, before turning around and walking closer to the shoreline. "I couldn't tell anyone before the school announced it. I just happened to be offered a job from UA when I was searching for a successor." Izumi's mind flashed back to when she talked to All Might in the alley near her house. The fact that All Might was looking for a successor all the way back then meant that he had been hired at UA all the way back then as well. "Izumi, I see," Izumi realized. He was originally planning on choosing one of the students. One of the students gifted with an amazing quirk, like Izuku. Izumi looked at her hands, which had faint scars on them from the insane amount of damage her body went through. "My body broke with one kick and one punch of one for all," Izumi spoke, letting her fears be made clear. "I can't control it." "Toshinori, that can't be helped," Toshinori said with a sigh as he turned to look at the girl. He would help her get control over one for all however he could. He would try to explain it the way he learned to control the quirk that had been passed to him, just like it had been to Izumi. Around the same time somewhere in Mustafu, with Izuku had received a message from the Chobo hero, asking him to meet up. Izuku assumed it was because the man wanted to talk about the results of the entrance exam, and possibly confirm Izuku's suspicion that he would be placed in the hobos class. Making his way through the relatively busy streets in a less-than-ideal area of Mustafu, Izuku was just waiting for the man to suddenly appear out of nowhere, as was his habit. As if on cue, Izuku felt a tap on his shoulder. Looking over to see a relatively pale hand sticking out of a slate-black jumpsuit, Izuku turned around to see the man with long, shaggy black hair. His bright yellow goggles barely hid the red shine being produced from his eyes within. The trademark scarf hovered slightly, just like his hair. Izuku simply nodded and showed the hero his hands, which were empty, of course. The shabby-looking man released his hold on Izuku's shoulder and lifted the goggles, his hair and scarf coming to a rest once again. "Izuku, so?" Izuku opened the conversation for him, knowing the man as less than a conversationalist, especially when he was working. "Why did you want to talk?" "Hobo hero, stop being snarky, problem child," the man responded, a slight grin on his face as he looked at the boy standing beside him in a dark alleyway. "I wanted to congratulate you on passing. Although, I'm still not sure why you refused the recommendation." "Izuku, I told you already," Izuku responded with a sigh, looking at the man. "I didn't want to do the recommended exam. Besides, aren't most of the others that are recommended by large companies or other chart-topping heroes? Wouldn't it seem weird for a teacher to recommend someone? Are you even actually allowed to do that?" Izuku sent questions at the man in such a rapid-fire pace that he had to put a hand up. "Hobo hero, calm down, Midoriya," the hero said, putting a hand up. "First of all, technically I could have recommended you as a hero, not a teacher. Second, while you're correct, it still doesn't answer my question. You knew I was going to request you to be in my class, so why go through the hassle of the entrance exam?" "Izuku, because I wanted actually to test myself. I remember seeing one of your text messages saying the recommended exam was an obstacle race." "An obstacle race? Besides, I didn't have nearly as much control over my quirk as I do now. I also know a lot more now," Izuku stated bluntly. I also wanted to show out a little and I hoped I could burst Katsuki's bubble a little, but they put us on different battle centers. Hobo hero, and I'm sure, the man replied, unimpressed with the boy's excuse. Look, I've got another question. He saw my text messages. When the hell could he have done that? Izuku, what is it? Izuku responded, curious as to what the hero could want from him. Hobo hero, your sister, cousin, whatever, she also took the entrance exams, the hero said, looking at the boy. Izuku, right, that's not really a question though. Izuku said, looking at the man, still confused. Hobo hero, tell me, when did her quirk awaken? The hero asked seriously, looking at Izuku in his eyes. Izuku, I'm not sure, all I know is that she spent the last 10 or so months training her butt off in order to get in. Izuku said. A quirk? Was that why she was so hurt that day? That's why it took her so long to come out that day. Hobo hero, the man hummed in response to Izuku's reply. The boy wasn't lying, but he also had genuinely no idea when it happened. That only made it more suspicious in his eyes. Anyway, how do you like the tonfa? He asked, trying to steer the topic into a more amicable subject. Izuku, they work great. I sent in my costume design and asked for another weapon as well. Izuku said, looking at the shaggy hero. Hobo hero, well, I'm glad that you're all settled. You know that you'll be in my class, right? The hero said, looking over his shoulder as he began to walk away from the boy. Oh, and just so you know, you're classified as a recommended student. I talked to the rat about you and let him know. Izuku, yeah, 1A right. Izuku said, watching the man use the scarf he wore to swing up onto a fire escape and then disappear onto the rooftops. Eraserhead, so I'm technically one of the recommended students, SHADOWS. Third-person POV. Approximately 3 weeks later, at the beginning of April in the Midoriya household, with Izumi, Izuku, and Inko. Izuku, do you have your tissue? The older green-haired woman asked frantically. Izuku, yes, auntie. Izuku responded, sitting on the step near their front door and tying his sneakers. Inko, Izumi, what about you? Inko asked, just as stressed about her daughter, if not more, than she was about her nephew and adopted son, Izuku. What about your handkerchief? Your hanky? Izumi, I have it. Izumi called to her mom over her shoulder as she slung her bright yellow backpack over it. Come on Izuku, we're going to be late. We have to hurry. Izuku, right by, auntie. Izuku said as he finished tying his shoes and stood up, grabbing his bag and following Izumi to the door. Inko, Izumi. Izuku. Inko called out to her children as they were about to walk out the door for their first day of high school. Izumi, what is it? Izumi asked, a look of slight annoyance and worry on her face as she opened the door, but stopped to look at her mother. Inko, you're both really cool, Inko said, smiling softly with tears welling up in her eyes. With that, the two bid farewell to the older greenette and made their way toward the massive U8 campus, resting atop a large hill in Mustafu. A little while later at the gates of Uye, with Izuku and Izumi, Izuku looked up at the massive campus as he walked beside Izumi, who was trying to rush up the hill ahead of him. He had to call for her a few times to slow down so that they still had plenty of time to get to class. Izuku, Uye's acceptance rate, especially for the hero course, is insane. This year's rate for the hero course was less than 1 in 300 participants. Other than the 6 who were accepted through recommended student slots, 36 were admitted through the regular exam. Izuku thought as he and Izumi picked up their pace to make it through the large building to Class 1A. Those 36 were split into only 2 classes with 18 in each. That and the 3 recommended students admitted to each class make up a class size of 21 per class for our year, Izuku thought as he watched Izumi look around the hallways frantically. Izumi, Class 1A 1A, Izumi repeated to herself as she held tightly onto the straps of her bag. This place is too big. Izumi continued running until from her side she heard Izuku's voice. Izuku, there it is. Izuku said, pointing at the sign high on the wall. The massive door with a large 1A painted on it was also kind of obvious. The 2 siblings stood in front of the freakishly tall door, looking at the handle. Izumi, This door is huge. 𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought to herself as she hesitated to slide the door open. Is it for accessibility? Stealing her resolve, 𝗍𝗵𝗲 gripped the handle and said out loud, "The elite chosen from the huge number at the exam." 𝗍𝗵𝗲's mind conjured distorted images of Katsuki and the blue-haired boy with glasses from the entrance exam. Shaking her head, 𝗍𝗵𝗲 placed her hand firmly on the handle once again. Izuku, man, I hope I'm not in the same class as all the annoying people, Izuku thought to himself. His hopes were crushed when 𝗍𝗵𝗲 slid the door open. SHADOWS. Third-person POV. Inside Class 1A, with 𝗍𝗵𝗲 and Izuku, it was as if the gods above had heard his plea and chose to give him the exact opposite out of spite. The hope of a peaceful class with normal students was thrown out the window when he heard a loud, authoritative voice barking orders at someone. Stiff blue-haired boy, don't put your feet on the desk. The boy with blue hair and glasses, the one from the entrance exam, stood in front of another student who was casually leaning back in his chair, both of his feet kicked up on the desk in front of him. Katsuki, huh? Katsuki asked with a sneer, looking at the stiff boy in front of him. Stiff blue-haired boy, don't you think that's rude to the upperclassmen and alumni who used this desk in the past, or even the people who made it? The blue-haired boy continued to scold the ashen blonde-haired boy, completely unable to reason with him. Katsuki, nope. Katsuki growled at the stiff boy, what junior high did you go to, you extra? 𝗍𝗵𝗲 and Izuku stood at the open door, still not entering into the room. 𝗍𝗵𝗲 seemed to hide behind the wall slightly, as she watched the two people she was most afraid of being classmates with fight amongst each other. Izuku just watched, rubbing the bridge of his nose in annoyance. He wasn't looking forward to this homeroom if these two were going to be like the rest of their classmates. 𝗍𝗵𝗲, the top two. 𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought as she sighed to herself. Izuku, these two, are you serious? Izuku thought in distress as he looked at the two classmates. Stiff blue-haired boy, I attended semi-private academy. The boy began to introduce himself, placing a hand on his wrist. Izuku, it seems my guess was right back then, Izuku thought as he listened to the boy's introduction. Ida, my name is Ida Tenya. Ida finished his self-introduction with a crisp handchop at Katsuki. Katsuki, semi? Katsuki said with a snarl, so you're a dim and elite, huh? Looks like I'll have fun crushing you. Katsuki finished as he leaned in with a sneer, his sharp, hostile red eyes staring into Ida's dark blue eyes. Ida, crushing? Ida repeated with a shocked gasp. That's cruel. Do you truly aim to be a hero? Ida looked at the boy with ash blonde hair, recoiling in surprise. Katsuki, teach. Katsuki clicked his tongue and looked away in response. That question brought up some bad memories from recent months. The two finally stopped fighting with each other to look at the door and realize the presence of two new arrivals. Ida's eyes widened as he recognized both of the students standing in the doorway. He had met them both at the entrance exam. However, his attention was drawn to the girl with curly green hair falling to her shoulders. Katsuki's eyes narrowed as he saw 𝗍𝗵𝗲 and Izuku standing in the doorway. Ida, you're Ida said, looking at 𝗍𝗵𝗲. His change of attention caused the other students who had already found their seats to look at them. 𝗍𝗵𝗲. 𝗍𝗵𝗲 shouted, anxious about all of the eyes suddenly looking at her. Izuku. Izuku hummed uninterested, his hand in his pocket as he watched Ida approach. Ida, good morning. Ida said stoically as he walked up to 𝗍𝗵𝗲, who was beginning to grow red in the cheeks with all the attention on her. I am from semi-private academy. My name is Izuku. Yeah, we heard what your name was. We watched the entire argument. Izuku interrupted Ida and caused him to stop walking. 𝗍𝗵𝗲. 𝗍𝗵𝗲. Nice to meet you, Ida-kun. 𝗍𝗵𝗲 said, trying to recover from Izuku's rudeness. Izuku remained silent as he watched the interactions taking place. Ida, Midoriya-chan, you realized there was something more to that practical exam, didn't you? Ida said assuredly, looking at 𝗍𝗵𝗲 for answers. This only confused 𝗍𝗵𝗲, who looked at him and an eyebrow. I had no idea I misjudged you. Ida apologized, raising two knife hands to emphasize his point. I hate to admit it, But you are better than me. Izumi. Sorry, Izumi apologized quietly. I didn't actually realize anything. 𝗬𝗏𝗃𝗃, oh that curly hair. You're the pain-looking girl. Present Mike said you'd pass, and you did. A cheery female voice called from behind. Wait, you're the boy that I prevented from falling at the entrance exam too. That's crazy, you both passed. Izumi, it's that girl who helped me on the entrance exams, the one who went to talk to the staff after the exam. Izumi thought to herself. Izuku, it's her, the one who saved me from falling on my face and embarrassing myself in front of the entire group of examinees. Izuku thought as he blushed slightly from the girl's proximity. She looks good in a uniform. 𝗬𝗏𝗃𝗃, of course you did, the girl said enthusiastically, turning back to speak to Izumi. Your punch was amazing. Izumi, well, it was only thanks to you going to speak to them directly that Izumi stammered, embarrassed with the level of praise she was getting from the girl. 𝗬𝗏𝗃𝗃 Achiko. Achiko, how did you know about that? Achiko asked Izumi, confused about how the green-haired girl knew what she had done. Izumi, Izumi stammered, trying to come up with something. That's because, inside the room, Katsuki was sitting at his desk, staring at the two green-haired teenagers from the corner of his eyes with a deep scowl on his face. He remembered when their old homeroom teacher called them to the staff office to congratulate them on getting into UA. Flashback, inside the faculty office, Aldra Junior High, with Izuku, Izumi, Katsuki, and their homeroom teacher. I can't believe we have 3 students from our school matriculating into UA, the blonde-haired man said in hypocritical joy. Especially you, Izumi, it's a miracle, he said, looking at the girl standing stiffly beside her brother and Katsuki. Izuku merely rolled his eyes at the obnoxious comment the teacher had made, choosing to look at the other 2 students in the room with him as well. Katsuki looked at Izumi from the corner of his eyes. Rage burned fiercely in his gaze. He sneered as he looked at Izuku, but the look he gave Izumi was one of absolute and pure rage. A few minutes later outside, on Aldra Junior High's campus, with Izumi and Katsuki had managed to find Izumi while Izuku wasn't around. The blonde boy had some questions he needed answers to, and if that parasite was there, he would only get in the way. After cornering Izumi and slamming her against the wall of the school, he stared at her furiously. Murderous intent poured from every fiber of his being as he tried as hard as he could to hold himself back. Katsuki grabbed Izumi's uniform blouse and pulled it, before shoving her against the wall again. This time using his grip on her uniform to pin her against the concrete. Katsuki, what dirty tricks did you use to get in, huh? Katsuki accused the girl, enraged. Katsuki began shaking the girl lightly as he continued his rant. The first student from this school to go to UA, my future plan has already been torn to pieces. I told you and that parasite brother of yours to go somewhere else. Katsuki shouted at Izumi, watching her head lower slightly. Katsuki let out a small gasp when he felt an arm grab his. But as he looked down, his shock grew into rage as he saw Izumi had grabbed his hand, gripping it tightly as if to defy him. Izumi, Kaken? Izumi said, gripping the blonde boy's wrist. Someone told me you can become a hero. Izumi continued to speak, her voice growing in strength and defiance. That it was because of my own efforts why Izumi paused, looking at Katsuki in his eye. The boy could see a fire had been lit deep within. A fire that would not be extinguished by him anytime soon. I'm going. Present, Katsuki, how dare she defy me? Katsuki growled and thought to himself as he clenched his jaw tightly. Something's definitely up. And then that 𝗵𝗃 parasite is here too. Goddammit, why can't they just know their place? Achiko, I wonder if today's just the entrance ceremony and orientation? Achiko said excitedly as she got closer and closer to the Midoriya siblings. I wonder what our sensei is gonna be like. Izumi, isn't she a little close to Izuku? Izumi thought as she looked at her brother's eyes widening. Izuku, welp, I guess we'll see, Izuku answered vaguely while looking at a bright yellow heap on the floor of the hallway behind Achiko. Hobo hero, go somewhere else if you want to play and make friends. A harsh and tired voice came from behind and below Achiko, startling both her and Izumi, as well as the rest of the class aside from Izuku, who had seen the man before he began to speak. Izumi gasped in surprise as she looked down and saw the caterpillar-like heap with a face and dark black hair on the ground. Achiko, startled by the new voice appearing suddenly, slowly turned over her shoulder to look behind her. Ida stood, looking over the trio's heads and down at the man in a bright yellow sleeping bag, just laying in the middle of the hallway. "Hobo hero, this is the hero course," the homeless-looking man explained, unzipping the sleeping bag slightly so he could eat some squeezable applesauce. Izumi, Achiko, and Ida, something's here, the three thought in horror as they looked down on the strange person behind them. Izuku, what the hell is he doing? Izuku thought to himself as he watched Eraserhead stand up slowly and take off the bright yellow sleeping bag. "Hobo hero, okay," the man said as he unzipped the sleeping bag all the way and stepped out of it. "It took you 8 seconds before you were quiet, and 3 seconds after I spoke to realize I was there. Time is limited," he said, his voice low and exhausted sounding. "You kids are not rational enough." Izumi, a teacher, Izumi thought as she looked at the shabby man. "Which means, that person's a pro hero too. But I've never seen a hero who looked that worn out before." "Aizawa, I'm your homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shota," the man introduced himself as he stepped into the room, causing the four who were loitering near the doorway to enter the classroom. "Nice to meet you." Aizawa's eyes scanned the students in the classroom as they gasped in surprise. The only one who seemed to know was his student, Midoriya Izuku. "Students, Izuku, homeroom teacher," the students gasped in surprise and murmured to themselves. "Aizawa, it's kind of sudden," Aizawa said, reaching into his sleeping bag. Pulling out a blue UAP uniform and showing it to the group, Aizawa continued, "But put one of these on and go out to the PE field. There's one in each of your assigned desks." All of the students looked at the man in confusion. Izuku was the first one to break the stillness as he went to his assigned desk and grabbed the PE uniform before walking out of the door. Simply passing by Aizawa and his other, dumbfounded classmates. In the U8th faculty office, with Toshinori sat at his desk in the faculty office. He was pretty much alone, as the others all had classes to teach or watch over. Since he was alone, Toshinori used the opportunity to figure out exactly which class Izumi was in. He knew that AUH students' educational and professional future rested solely in the hands of their homeroom teacher. Toshinori. The UE8 system does not follow the beaten path, Toshinori thought as he flipped through the teacher's directory he had been given. Depending on the homeroom teacher, even the first day can be, Toshinori thought with a concerned gulp. SHADOWS. Third-person POV. A few minutes later on the PE field, with Class 1A, a quirk assessment test, the entire class asked in confusion. The class had all gotten changed into their PE uniforms and stood in a crowd on the PE field, next to a shot put field. Each of the students had a different reaction to the reveal of the sudden test being administered. They weren't ready or prepared for a pop quiz like this. "Achiko, what about the entrance ceremony?" Achiko asked, worried. "The orientation?" "Aizawa, if you're going to become a hero, you don't have time for such leisurely events." Aizawa answered, not even turning to face the girl. The teacher's response sent gasps throughout the group of students. UA's selling point is how unrestricted its school traditions are. That also applies to how the teachers run their classes. Aizawa's blunt nature left no room for argument. The students shifted in uncomfortable silence for a moment as they felt the discomfort of being under those tired but vigilant eyes. "Aizawa, you kids have been doing these since junior high, too, right?" Aizawa asked, standing in the middle of one of the shot put mounds. Aizawa pulled out a device the size of a cell phone which displayed a list of activities. Aizawa continued to explain, physical fitness tests where you weren't allowed to use your quirks. The country still uses averages taken from results from students not using their quirks. It's not rational. The class stood in silence, listening to their homeroom teacher speak. He wasn't giving them a chance to interject their opinions, anyway. Aizawa, well, the Ministry of Education is procrastinating, Aizawa said. The man then turned his attention to a boy with spiky blonde hair and spoke, "Bakugo, you finished at the top of the practical exam, right?" This caused Katsuki to look up and hum in acknowledgement. In junior high, what was your best result for the softball throw? Aizawa asked. Katsuki, 67 meters, Katsuki responded simply. Aizawa, then, try doing it with your quirk, Aizawa said as he tossed the boy a softball. Aizawa moved out of the way and Katsuki took his spot on the mound, ready to throw when given the okay. Aizawa, you can do whatever you want, as long as you stay in the circle, Aizawa advised. Hurry up. Give it all you've got. Katsuki, then, well, Katsuki said as he stretched his right arm. Steadying his footing and loosening his hips, Katsuki thought to himself, I'll add a blast to the pitch. Bakugo quickly rotated his hips as he brought down his other leg, rearing his arm back and launching it forward, causing an explosion at the last moment to blast the softball away as far as possible, all while shouting, Daich. Izumi, die. Izumi wondered to herself, stunned. The group of students watches as a trail of smoke follows the softball into the air as it flies for a few seconds before vanishing from sight. Aizawa, know your maximum first, Aizawa said, looking into the distance at where the softball was flying. After it hit the ground, the results came back and Aizawa turned to face the rest of the class, saying, that is the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. Aizawa held up the device, displaying Katsuki's result of 705. 2 meters for the rest of the class to see. This sent waves of gasps and stunned silence through the class for a few moments. Blonde boy with a black lightning bolt in his hair, 750 meters. Seriously? A boy said, raising an eyebrow in intrigue and surprise. Pink girl with horns. What's this? Asked a girl with pink skin and horns. Her scara was completely black, emphasizing the golden color of her irises. It looks like fun. Boy with slicked back black hair and oversized elbows, we can use our quirks as much as we want. As expected from the hero course. Another boy, who had black hair that seemed to slick back naturally, said in excitement. Aizawa, it looks fun, huh? Aizawa repeated what one of the students had said. His voice danced between dark and cold. You have 3 years to become a hero. Will you have an attitude like that the whole time? Aizawa asked the group, his gaze sharpening as he locked onto Ochiko, who had been the one to complain about the entrance ceremony and orientation earlier. A sinister grin formed on his lips as he continued speaking. All right. Whoever comes in last place in all 8 tests, Aizawa said, his voice growing heavy and threatening, will be judged to have no potential and will be punished with expulsion. Class 1A, Izuku-ta. They all shouted in shock at the sudden death-style stakes being placed on this physical exam. In the faculty office, with Tashinori finds the page listing the first-year teachers and locates the homeroom teacher in charge of 1A, Izumi's class. Tashinori, oh, Tashinori curses quietly as he rests his head on a hand. Aizawa, she'll be facing a lot of suffering right from the start. On the PE field, with Class 1A, Izumi could feel the tension and pressure of the stakes. It also felt like her homeroom teacher, Aizawa, was staring right at her with a smug grin on his face. Izumi, punished with expulsion. Izumi panicked internally. Oh no, this is bad in all 8 tests. Izumi took a shaky breath and looked at her hand. I can only use one for all at either 100 or 0%. I can't control it yet at all. Aizawa, we're free to do what we want about the circumstances of our students, Aizawa said seriously, looking at the group assembled in front of him with a slightly crazed gaze. Welcome to UA's hero course. The students all had different reactions to the revelation, but the most common one amongst the group of teenagers was worry. Izumi, a huge test on the first day of school. Izumi thought, terrified. What am I going to do? SHADOWS. Third-person POV. A moment later on the PE field, with Class 1A Ochiko, last place will be expelled. Ochiko shouted, shocked at the level of stakes being placed on a test on the first day of school. But it's the first day of school. No, even if it wasn't the first day of school, this is too unfair. Ochiko tried to reason with Aizawa, but the man continued to look at her with disinterest. Izuku, natural disasters, big accidents, sudden organ failure, and selfish villains? Izuku said sharply, not looking around at the other students. Calamities whose time or place can't be predicted. Emergencies happening in places so far out of reach it seems utterly helpless. Thousands of unexplained cases of death or disappearances occur daily. Japan is covered with unfairness. Izuku's voice grew colder and colder as he described the reality of the harsh world they found themselves living in. Aizawa, thank you Midoriya, Aizawa said, looking at the green-haired boy. Heroes are the ones who reverse those situations. If you wanted to go talk with your friends at Mickey D's after school, too bad. Aizawa continued where Izuku had left off. For the next 3 years, U8 will do all it can to give you one hardship after another. Go beyond. Aizawa paused, letting the message sink into the students standing in front of him. Plus ultra. Aizawa finished the school's motto with an unenthused tone. Overcome it with all you've got. Aizawa said in closing, raising a finger and beckoning all of them to bring out their absolute best. The group of students is left stunned at the end of their homeroom teacher's lecture. Beyond that, there was the student who started the whole thing when he responded to Ochako. All eyes of the students fell on Izuku before they began to burn with their own passion and drive to secure their place in 𝗳𝗏𝗄's hero course. Ida, this is too serious to be hazing, Ida thought to himself as he drank from a small sports bottle he had brought out to the field with him. However, this is the best of the best. There is no choice but to do it. Ida reassured himself, puffing his tea out proudly. Katsuki, this isn't all I've got. Katsuki thought to himself confidently as he rotated his arm, loosening his shoulder. Ochako seemed to grunt with a newfound resolve to do her absolute best on this test. Izuku, this is going to be boring. Izuku thought to himself as he looked around at the other students trying to hype themselves up. Let's just get it over with. Aizawa, all right, the demonstration's over. Aizawa announced. The real thing starts now. A few minutes later at the nearby 50-meter dash track at the end of the 50 meters stood an autonomous camera that would capture the time it took from start to finish. Izuku watched as Ida and a girl with frog-like features readied themselves. Listening for the go mark, the moment they received it, they began to make their way down the track as fast as possible. Auto camera, Ida Tenya, 3. For seconds, it announced as Ida practically flew by. Ida, for 50 meters I can only go up to third gear, Ida lamented silently. Aizawa, well, Aizawa muttered just loud enough for Izuku to hear, he's like a fish in water. It'll be worth seeing what others can do. Izuku could tell what his quirk was. There were exhaust pipes protruding from his calves, and Izuku assumed that they increased the strength and speed of Ida's legs. Auto camera, Ashuitu, 5. 58 seconds, it announced as the frog-like girl passed by. Karo, the girl turned over her shoulder and let her long tongue hang from her mouth. Izuku looked at her and could tell that she was a heteromorph of some kind. Specifically that of a frog, given her long tongue, strong legs, and scrunched arms. She also stood with a generally hunched posture, cementing Izuku's theory. Izuku watched as the next round of students took their turns. Ochako, lighten up my clothes and shoes, Ochako muttered as she touched her clothes and shoes with her fingertips. After the go mark, Ochako took off running, barely feeling the resistance of her clothes and shoes, allowing her to go just a little bit faster than she would have normally. The boy with the tail, who had gone at the same time as Ochako, finished just milliseconds before she did. As she crossed the finish line, she heard the computer call out her time of 7:15 seconds. Ochako, oh, but that's faster than I was in junior high. Ochako thought to herself as she touched her fingertips together, releasing her quirk. Izuku, interesting, it seems like she really does need to use all her fingers to nullify the effects of gravity. Izuku thought, remembering the girl told him about her quirk on the day of the entrance exam. After a few more students had gone, Aizawa watched with growing interest. Aizawa, looking at the upper limit of your quirks and the room for growth in each result, Aizawa said as he watched the student named Yuga Aoyama finish in a long 10-20 seconds after using his quirk, the naval laser. It becomes clear what you can and can't do. Aizawa turned to watch as Izumi and Katsuki took their turns on the 50-meter dash, paying close attention to the curly-haired girl. 𝗳𝗍𝗄, that will connect the creativity needed for you to survive. 𝗳𝗍𝗄 thought as he watched Katsuki use his explosions to accelerate his running speed, leaving 𝗬𝗍𝗄 behind easily. 𝗬𝗍𝗄 simply ran, not using her quirk in any way, which bothered 𝗳𝗍𝗄 yet again. She's holding back so we don't have a repeat of the entrance exam. Katsuki, when I use both hands the force disperses. Katsuki muttered his observation to himself as he passed the finish line, earning a time of 4:12 seconds. Katsuki looked at the smoke wafting off of his palms as he turned his attention to 𝗬𝗍𝗄, who had just finished her 50-meter dash. She was leaning over and trying her best to catch her breath. Deku is, 𝗬𝗍𝗄, there are 7 more tests. 𝗬𝗍𝗄 thought to herself, trying to plan out how she would complete these tests. I'm sure everyone will use their quirks to produce some extraordinary results. Again, 𝗬𝗍𝗄 felt 𝗳𝗍𝗄's eyes boring into her as she tried to calm down. On the other hand, I have this power that will break my body if I use it even once. Control. 𝗬𝗍𝗄 breathed in and out, hoping to slow her heart rate even if just by a little. Even if I have the image in my head. When I actually have to use it, 𝗬𝗍𝗄 began to visualize the egg in a microwave, just like she explained to All Might the night she met with him on the beach. How the blonde man had told her to simply focus on that image she had, the image of preventing the egg from exploding. When it was Izuku's turn, he ran just like he usually would. None of the shikigami he had would be useful for a majority of these tests, and 𝗳𝗍𝗄 knew that. Izuku, this JRK, he thinks it's funny, isn't it? He knows that I can't use my quirk on like 90% of these physical fitness tests. Izuku's body rushed forward in a sprint when he heard the go mark. A few moments later, Izuku had crossed the finish line. Auto camera, Midoriya Izuku, 5:49 seconds. Izuku, whoa, a whole second faster than junior high. Izuku thought to himself, looking behind him at the beginning position. A short while later, inside the nearby PE gymnasium, with Class 1A, 𝗬𝗍𝗄 stood a small distance from anyone nearby. She had her eyes closed and she was holding her arms stiffly. 𝗬𝗍𝗄, the image of the egg not exploding. 𝗬𝗍𝗄 repeated the mantra to herself as she felt her nerves beginning to get the better of her. Her mind returned to the blinding pain of her 3 destroyed limbs during the entrance exam. As 𝗬𝗍𝗄's body tightened in response to her memory, her hand holding the grip tester squeezed tight, causing the reading to come out. 𝗬𝗍𝗄 looked at her result. 𝗬𝗍𝗄, 56.0. 𝗬𝗍𝗄 thought, her eyes shining with pride. That's the best I've ever gotten. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, wow. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, the boy with slicked back black hair and oddly shaped elbows, yelled out in surprise. He was standing next to a boy with 6 sets of arms and looked in awe at the result he had gotten. 540 kilograms. What are you, a gorilla? Oh, an octopus. 𝗵𝗃𝗃, octopuses are secretary, a short boy with purple ball for hair, whose name was 𝗵𝗃𝗃, spoke. Izuku, what the F? Izuku, who was nearby, thought in response to 𝗵𝗃𝗃's statement. 𝗬𝗍𝗄 said, looking at the green-haired boy, heroes are the ones who reverse those situations. If you wanted to go talk with your friends at Mickey D's after school, too bad. 𝗳𝗍𝗄 continued where Izuku had left off. For the next 3 years, U8 will do all it can to give you one hardship after another. Go beyond. 𝗳𝗍𝗄 paused, letting the message sink into the students standing in front of him, plus ultra. 𝗳𝗍𝗄 finished the school's motto with an unenthused tone. Overcome it with all you've got, 𝗳𝗍𝗄 said in closing, raising a finger and beckoning all of them to bring out their absolute best. The group of students is left stunned at the end of their homeroom teacher's lecture. Beyond that, there was the student who started the whole thing when he responded to Ochiko. All eyes of the students fell on Izuku before they began to burn with their own passion and drive to secure their place in 𝗬𝗍𝗄's hero course. Ida, this is too serious to be hazing, Ida thought to himself as he drank from a small sports bottle he had brought out to the field with him. However, this is the best of the best. There is no choice but to do it. Ida reassured himself, puffing his tea out proudly. Katsuki, this isn't all I've got. Katsuki thought to himself confidently as he rotated his arm, loosening his shoulder. Achiko seemed to grunt with a newfound resolve to do her absolute best on this test. Izuku, this is going to be boring. Izuku thought to himself as he looked around at the other students trying to hype themselves up. Let's just get it over with. Aizawa, all right, the demonstration's over. Aizawa announced. The real thing starts now. A few minutes later at the nearby 50-meter dash track at the end of the 50 meters stood an autonomous camera that would capture the time it took from start to finish. Izuku watched as Ida and a girl with frog-like features readied themselves. Listening for the go mark, the moment they received it, they began to make their way down the track as fast as possible. Auto camera, Ida Tenya, 3. For seconds, it announced as Ida practically flew by. Ida, for 50 meters, I can only go up to third gear, Ida lamented silently. Aizawa, well, Aizawa muttered just loud enough for Izuku to hear, he's like a fish in water. It'll be worth seeing what others can do. Izuku could tell what his quirk was. There were exhaust pipes protruding from his calves, and Izuku assumed that they increased the strength and speed of Ida's legs. Auto camera, Ashuithu, 5. 58 seconds, it announced as the frog-like girl passed by. Karo, the girl turned over her shoulder and let her long tongue hang from her mouth. Izuku looked at her and could tell that she was a heteromorph of some kind. Specifically that of a frog, given her long tongue, strong legs, and scrunched arms. She also stood with a generally hunched posture, cementing Izuku's theory. Izuku watched as the next round of students took their turns. Achiko, lighten up my clothes and shoes, Achiko muttered as she touched her clothes and shoes with her fingertips. After the go mark, Achiko took off running, barely feeling the resistance of her clothes and shoes, allowing her to go just a little bit faster than she would have normally. The boy with the tail, who had gone at the same time as Achiko, finished just milliseconds before she did. As she crossed the finish line, she heard the computer call out her time of 7:15 seconds. Achiko, oh, but that's faster than I was in junior high. Achiko thought to herself as she touched her fingertips together, releasing her quirk. Izuku, interesting, it seems like she really does need to use all her fingers to nullify the effects of gravity. Izuku thought, remembering the girl told him about her quirk on the day of the entrance exam. After a few more students had gone, Aizawa watched with growing interest. Aizawa, looking at the upper limit of your quirks and the room for growth in each result, Aizawa said as he watched the student named Yuga Aoyama finish in a long 10-20 seconds after using his quirk, the 𝗔𝗵𝗄 laser. It becomes clear what you can and can't do. Aizawa turned to watch as Izumi and Katsuki took their turns on the 50-meter dash. Paying close attention to the curly-haired girl. Aizawa, that will connect the creativity needed for you to survive. Aizawa thought as he watched Katsuki use his explosions to accelerate his running speed, leaving Izumi behind easily. Izumi simply ran, not using her quirk in any way, which bothered Aizawa yet again. She's holding back so we don't have a repeat of the entrance exam. Katsuki, when I use both hands the force disperses. Katsuki muttered his observation to himself as he passed the finish line, earning a time of 4:12 seconds. Katsuki looked at the smoke wafting off of his palms as he turned his attention to Izumi, who had just finished her 50-meter dash. She was leaning over and trying her best to catch her breath. Deku is, Izumi, there are 7 more tests. Izumi thought to herself, trying to plan out how she would complete these tests. I'm sure everyone will use their quirks to produce some extraordinary results. Again, Izumi felt Aizawa's eyes boring into her as she tried to calm down. On the other hand, I have this power that will break my body if I use it even once. Control. Izumi breathed in and out, hoping to slow her heart rate even if just by a little. Even if I have the image in my head. When I actually have to use it, Izumi began to visualize the egg in a microwave, just like she explained to All Might the night she met with him on the beach. How the blonde man had told her to simply focus on that image she had, the image of preventing the egg from exploding. When it was Izuku's turn, he ran just like he usually would. None of the shikigami he had would be useful for a majority of these tests, and Aizawa knew that. Izuku, this JRK, he thinks it's funny, isn't it? He knows that I can't use my quirk on like 90% of these physical fitness tests. Izuku's body rushed forward in a sprint when he heard the go mark. A few moments later, Izuku had crossed the finish line. Auto camera, Midoriya Izuku, 5:49 seconds. Izuku, whoa, a whole second faster than junior high. Izuku thought to himself, looking behind him at the beginning position. A short while later, inside the nearby PE gymnasium, with Class 1A, Izumi stood a small distance from anyone nearby. She had her eyes closed and she was holding her arms stiffly. Izumi, the image of the egg not exploding. Izumi repeated the mantra to herself as she felt her nerves beginning to get the better of her. Her mind returned to the blinding pain of her 3 destroyed limbs during the entrance exam. As Izumi's body tightened in response to her memory, her hand holding the grip tester squeezed tight, causing the reading to come out. Izumi looked at her result. Izumi, 56.0. Izumi thought, her eyes shining with pride. That's the best I've ever gotten. Ciro, wow. Ciro Hanta, the boy with slicked back black hair and oddly shaped elbows, yelled out in surprise. He was standing next to a boy with 6 sets of arms and looked in awe at the result he had gotten. 540 kilograms. What are you, a gorilla? Oh, an octopus. Mineta, octopuses are secretary, a short boy with purple ball for hair, whose name was Mineta Minoru, spoke. Izuku, what the F? Izuku, who was nearby, thought in response to Mineta's statement. Izumi. Display her extremely strong quirk before. Izuku simply watched with the normal cold gaze as he oversaw Katsuki's regular antics. Ida, quirkless? Ida said, flabbergasted, are you not aware of what she did in the entrance exam? Katsuki, huh? Katsuki grunted, looking from Ida back to Izumi, who had yet to throw. Aizawa, it's about time, isn't it? Aizawa thought critically as he watched the green-haired girl closely. Izumi could hear her mother's voice resounding in her ears. Even from this very morning, when Inko had professed how cool Izumi was. She could hear All Might's voice as he told her the words she had been waiting to hear her entire life. You can become a hero. And her memories of Izuku, and his ever-present faith in her dream to become a hero. Even when there really was nobody else who believed she could do it, there was Izuku, cheering her on in his own way. Izumi gritted her teeth as she found her resolve. She her arm back ready to throw. As she was moving her arm forward to launch the ball as far as she could, Izumi began to send the quirk essence of one for alts to her arm. Izumi was managing to do it, even if just by a little. Izumi, I'll definitely become one. Izumi thought to herself, steeling her resolve for the trials to come. Izumi launched the ball forward as she finished her thought. There was no loud boom, no blast of air pressure, it was just a regular, boring throw. Izumi stood there frozen as the nearby auto camera stood. Auto camera, 46 meters. Izumi was stunned, baffled, destroyed. This was her one chance to actually pull herself out of last place and remain at the school she tried so hard to be accepted into. Her world was beginning to collapse around her. Izumi, 𝗬𝗵𝗃𝗁𝗏. I was definitely trying to use it just now, Izumi said, her voice shaking as she looked at her arms. Aizawa, I erased your quirk, Aizawa announced, his hair and scarf floating ethereally around him as his eyes glowed a bright red. Izumi turned to look at her homeroom teacher, who was now approaching her menacingly. She could see the faces of some of her classmates behind him. They were in shock and confusion as well, they hadn't expected that to be the outcome. Aizawa, that entrance exam was definitely not rational enough, Aizawa said, his voice almost dripping in malice and rancor. Even a kid like you was accepted. Izumi, you erased my quirk. Izumi asked, stunned. Izumi then paused and thought, kid like me? What is that even supposed to mean? It was then that Izumi realized as she saw the signature yellow goggles. Those goggles I see. Izumi said, you can erase other people's quirks with your quirk, just by looking at them. That erase your hero, erase her head. Izumi said, finally recognizing who her homeroom teacher was. Class 1 erupted into murmurs about their homeroom teacher and his identity as a pro hero. A majority of the students hadn't heard of the man, but the few who had knew only a few things about him. The 𝗧𝗵𝗃 hero was a very private and reclusive hero. 𝗳𝗏𝗃, eraser. I've never heard of him. 𝗳𝗏𝗃, the blonde boy with a tail, spoke. 𝗧𝗵𝗃, he's an underground hero. It's not surprising you haven't heard about him. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 responded. Nearby, standing behind the corner of a building, with all might. He doesn't like media attention because he says it hinders his work. 𝗵𝗃 thought to himself as he hid behind the corner of a nearby building, keeping a close eye on 𝗧𝗵𝗃 and 𝗧𝗏's interactions. That's right, young 𝗵𝗃𝗲, he and I don't get along at all. On the PE field, with 𝗧𝗵𝗃 and 𝗧𝗏, and Class 1A nearby, 𝗧𝗏 narrowed his eyes as he looked at the girl, who was currently wrapped up in his scarf/capture weapon. His gaze sharpened as he once again looked at 𝗧𝗵𝗃's limbs, before returning his glowing red gaze to her downtrodden and shocked face. 𝗧𝗏, from what I can tell, 𝗧𝗏 said, his voice remaining cold and harsh, you can't control your quirk, can you? This caused 𝗧𝗵𝗃 to gasp slightly before 𝗧𝗏 continued. Do you intend to become incapacitated again and have someone save you? 𝗧𝗵𝗃, that's not my intent. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 protested, but was interrupted as 𝗧𝗏's scarf tightened around her torso, pulling her closer to the man. 𝗧𝗏, whatever your intention, 𝗧𝗏 said, his voice chilling as he stared 𝗧𝗵𝗃 in her eyes, I'm saying that's what those around you will be forced to do. In the past, there was an oppressively passionate hero, 𝗧𝗏 spoke, his voice growing harsher with each passing word. 𝗧𝗏 looked off to the side to see the big, blonde oaf, the one he just so happened to be talking about, peeking around the corner of a building like a bumbling idiot, who saved over 1,000 people by himself and created a legend. 𝗧𝗏's barely contained spite leaked through and onto the girl in front of him. Even if you have the same reckless valor, you'll just end up injured and turn into a useless doll after saving one person. 𝗵𝗃𝗃 𝗧𝗵𝗃. 𝗧𝗏 paused, looking at the girl whose face was beginning to contort in fear and horror. With your power, you cannot become a hero. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 clenched her teeth and narrowed her eyes in defiance as she listened to 𝗧𝗏 say those things. A short gasp from the rest of the class punctuated the teacher's rant, or lecture, if it could be called that. 𝗧𝗏's hair stopped floating and the scarf came to rest once again around the man's shoulders. 𝗧𝗏 closed his eyes and took a deep breath, before opening them once again to look at the girl. 𝗧𝗏, I've returned your quirk, 𝗧𝗏 said, somewhat condescendingly. You'll have 2 turns for the ball throw. This is the second. 𝗧𝗏 then turned around and began walking back to the rest of the students standing nearby. Hurry up and get it over with. A sense of dread settled over some of the individuals in the area. Others simply watched with a detached sense of interest, like watching a train wreck or car crash. 𝗳𝗐𝗏, it looks like she received some advice. 𝗳𝗐𝗏 said, resting a hand on his chin in thought. 𝗵𝗃𝗃, probably just telling her she's expelled. 𝗵𝗃𝗃 commented. Nearby, 𝗬𝗏𝗃 began speaking with 𝗳𝗏𝗃. 𝗬𝗏𝗃, are you concerned for her? He asked, looking at 𝗳𝗏𝗃 who was clasping her hands together nervously. 𝗳𝗏𝗃, 𝗳𝗏𝗃 hummed, confused. 𝗬𝗏𝗃, I'm the blonde boy said, placing a hand on 𝗳𝗏𝗃's shoulder, not at all. 𝗳𝗏𝗃, who are you? 𝗳𝗏𝗃 asked, dumbfounded. 𝗧𝗏 and 𝗧𝗃 watched as 𝗧𝗵𝗃 seemed to be muttering to herself about what she should do. She was falling into an abyss of self-doubt that would only make this even harder for her. 𝗧𝗏, will she incorrigibly prepare for an honorable defeat here by using all of her strength? 𝗧𝗏 thought as he watched the girl's face, and the emotions rapidly flashing over it. Taking a moment to put some eye drops into his dry and bloodshot eyes. Or become intimidated and resign herself to settling for last place. No matter which she chooses, 𝗧𝗏 stared at the girl and sneered, she had no potential. 𝗧𝗵𝗃, I still can't control my power. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 reasoned with herself, trying to figure out a way where she could use her quirk and still be able to function after. Should I let everything I can do hang on this one throw? Even All Might said that it wouldn't happen overnight. Gritting her teeth, 𝗧𝗵𝗃 cursed herself, 𝗵𝗃𝗏. This is no good. If that's my only choice, then I just have to go all out. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 looked up once again, a crazed look in her eyes. 𝗧𝗏, zero potential? 𝗧𝗏 thought dismissively. 𝗬𝗵𝗃 took a step forward and began to rotate her arm. Getting ready to throw the softball with all of her might, 𝗬𝗵𝗃 prepared herself, mentally and physically, for what was about to come. 𝗬𝗵𝗃, it's just as Aizawa-sensei says, 𝗬𝗵𝗃 thought to herself as her arm reached the halfway point of the throw. Aizawa and All Might paused for a moment, their eyes widening in surprise. 𝗬𝗵𝗃, at this rate, there's no way I'll become a hero. 𝗬𝗵𝗃 thought to herself as she felt her arm nearing its full extension. The ball was beginning to roll off of her fingertips, and 𝗬𝗵𝗃 could feel a small string of drool dribbling out of her mouth from the sheer focus she was exerting at the moment. All Might, hey, is she serious? All Might muttered to himself, shocked by 𝗬𝗵𝗃's ingenuity. 𝗬𝗵𝗃, I have to work a lot harder than other people. 𝗬𝗵𝗃 shouted within her mind as her torso turned in line with her hips to give the ball just a little extra force behind the throw. That's why, with all of my strength. 𝗬𝗵𝗃 thought, channeling the quirk essence of one for all into the tip of her index finger. I'll do what I can right now. 𝗬𝗵𝗃 thought in defiant triumph as she applied her quirk to the connection point between the softball and her index fingertip. 𝗬𝗵𝗃 could feel it. There was something different about this time. Something even more different than before. 𝗬𝗵𝗃, 𝗬𝗵𝗃. 𝗬𝗵𝗃 shouted mentally as she applied her quirk essence to the throw at the last second. Everyone's eyes widened in shock as the ball was launched with an immense amount of power behind it. The air pressure was enough to tussle almost everyone's clothes and even caused some to raise a hand over their face for protection. A majority of the students in Class 1A gasped in surprise. The sheer power behind the throw was enough for them to be amazed. 𝗬𝗵𝗃, it doesn't hurt as much as before. 𝗬𝗵𝗃 thought to herself as she remained in the position she was when she finished throwing the softball. Aizawa stared at the girl, or more specifically, the hand she used to throw the ball. The arm itself was still intact, and only one of her fingers was discolored and likely broken. Aizawa watched as she gritted her teeth against the pain and turned to face him. The words he had spoken to the girl just moments earlier came back and rang in his ears as he looked at her, staring at him with a fiery determination and grit in her eyes. Aizawa looked at the device reading the results of 𝗬𝗵𝗃's throw. An impressive 705. 3 meters. 𝗬𝗵𝗃, Sensei 𝗬𝗵𝗃 said, her voice burning with passion and drive. 𝗬𝗵𝗃 raised her hand and closed her fist to show her homeroom teacher, I can still move. Aizawa, this kid, Aizawa said, looking at 𝗬𝗵𝗃 and smiling wide. Aizawa couldn't help but be floored by this girl. All Might, I came because I was worried. All Might muttered to himself, staring at the girl standing proudly, showing her homeroom teacher that she did have what it takes to be in the hero course. But what the heck, young lady? You still couldn't control your power, but you also couldn't become incapacitated. So instead, you propelled the ball at the last possible point of contact by sending the power of one for alts to just your fingertip, minimizing the injury while maximizing the power. All Might thought to himself, smiling proudly at his successor, what the heck, young lady? You're so cool. Izuku stood there in stunned silence. Not only had he not expected 𝗬𝗵𝗃 to have a quirk like that if she did in fact have one at all. But that wasn't what had him so shocked. No, it was the odd momentary flash of black and red that seemed to distort his vision for a moment. It painted the world in monochrome shades of black and white. Izuku had paid close attention to what 𝗬𝗵𝗃 did and to the result. Izuku could remember something from the book he was left, the Journal of Fushiguro Megumi. It was talked about in the glossary type section at the back of the journal. That was a portion he hadn't spent too much time on, as it covered things that still didn't quite make sense to him. Descriptions of things known as reversed curse technique and domain expansions, all abilities and techniques he would need to have a much stronger grasp on the basics of quirk essence controls to accomplish them. But those two weren't what this reminded him of. No, what 𝗬𝗵𝗃 just did reminded him of something he read at the end of that section. There was a passage that talked about something that was nearly impossible to do on command. Something that required an immense amount of either skill or luck to be able to pull off. A technique requiring such precise application of cursed energy, or in this case quirk essence, that to do it twice in a row was considered to be a miracle. a technique which required its user to apply their quirk essence within 0.00001 of a second before their strike, causing a distortion in the fabric of space itself, greatly empowering a strike. The elusive and difficult to achieve the Black Flash. SHADOWS. Shadows, 2/10 divine dogs, 2 wolves, 1 white and 1 black which manifest from the wielder's shadow. Summoned by performing a wolf hand seal, or shadow puppet. Both are capable of tearing humans and animals apart with their fangs and devouring them. Each of the dogs can detect enemies and items and notify their 𝗵𝗃𝗃 when one is close. Their tracking abilities allow them to find lost allies and locations as well. New, a winged Shikigami armed with great speed and electric shock wings. Summoned by performing a bird hand seal, or shadow puppet. It can support its 𝗵𝗃𝗃 by carrying them while flying to increase their mobility and can attack with its heavy wings charged with electricity, shocking anyone it hits and leaving them temporarily paralyzed. It's especially effective for taking opponents posted in high places off guard or in combination attacks with other Shikigami. In addition to basic offensive applications, Nu's speed and wings can also be used defensively to shield its 𝗵𝗃𝗃 from harm. Third-person POV. A moment later on the UA track, with Class 1A and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Class 1A stood in stunned silence as they stared at the girl standing in front of them. The blast of wind from her throw still had some of them attempting to straighten themselves out. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, it wasn't a throw that relied on power, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 thought to himself as he looked at the result of Izumi's throw. Reading a solid 705. 3 meters, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 turned his attention back to the girl, who was staring at him with a defiant fire in her eyes. She concentrated the power of her quirk to her fingertip. Izumi, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 since Izumi said, looking at the shaggy teacher and displaying her clenched fist. I can still move. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, this kid 𝗧𝗵𝗲 muttered to himself, a larger grin breaking out on his face. Izuku, what the F? What was that? Izuku thought to himself as he stared at Izumi in disbelief. How did she This doesn't make any sense. She doesn't even know what quirk essence is and she was able to do that. And look at her finger. She broke it. Is that from her quirk? Kaminari, she got over 700 meters? Kaminari shouted in shock. Looking at the greenette, she didn't look to be overly muscular and the rest of her results were fairly normal. Achiko, finally, a hero-like record. Achiko shouted in joy. Completely forgetting that only a few minutes prior she had set an impossible-to-beat record. Ida, her fingers swollen. Ida said, looking at the girl's hand, recalling the aftermath of her quirk from when he had seen it last. There was the entrance exam, too. She has a strange quirk, 𝗷𝗵𝗲𝗄. It's not very stylish. 𝗷𝗵𝗲, the boy with the naval laser, said to no one in particular. Katsuki, what's with that power? Katsuki thought to himself as he stared at Izumi, his body tense and his eyes widening with rage. Everyone's quirks manifest by the age of 4. This is unthinkable. No, impossible. But in reality, Katsuki began to sweat, his emotions beginning to get the better of him as he stared on, speechless. Katsuki thought back to his confrontation with the girl after learning about her entry into UA. What is the meaning of this? Katsuki growled, his rage growing uncontainable as small sparks popped in his palms. Dashing forward, Katsuki shouted. The class watched in shock as Bakugo dashed forward toward the green-haired girl, who had just performed really well on this test. His quirk popped in his hands, causing smoke to billow out behind him, almost as if he were rocketing himself forward. Katsuki, tell me what's going on, Deku, you idiot? Katsuki continued to shout, enraged as he continued to rush forward. Izuku clasped his hands together but didn't summon Shiro and Kuma, as he saw the gray fabric of 𝗧𝗵𝗲's scarf shooting toward the enraged blonde, quickly snatching him up and preventing his advance toward frankly, terrified Izumi. Izuku, along with the rest of his classmates and Katsuki, turned to look at their homeroom teacher, who stood there and stared at the boy menacingly. Katsuki, what the? Katsuki grunted as he tried to put forward again. These cloths are hard. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, they're capture weapons made of carbon fiber. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 answered dully, his hair floating ethereally around his head once again. They've been woven together with a metal wire made of a special alloy. Geez, 𝗬𝗏 growled in frustration. Don't make me keep using my quirk over and over. It gives me serious dry eye. Class 1A, what a waste, his quirk is so amazing. 𝗬𝗏, we're wasting time, 𝗬𝗏 said with a sigh, as he released the blonde boy and blinked. His hair returned to its usual state and the scarf retracted and rested around his shoulders. Whoever's next, get ready to take your throws, 𝗬𝗏 mumbled with a wave of his hand. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 stepped carefully around Katsuki, who remained standing where he had been stopped. Frozen. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 managed to get around the boy and quickly nursed her injured hand as she shuffled back toward the rest of the class amidst the awkward silence that followed the scene. 𝗳𝗏𝗄, is your finger all right? 𝗳𝗏𝗄 asked the girl as she returned to stand beside her brother. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, oh yeah. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 answered with a slight stutter. The girl still wasn't used to having her classmates respond with concern toward her and her injuries. Katsuki, tisk. Until a little while ago, Katsuki thought to himself as he looked at 𝗧𝗵𝗲 approaching the small group of individuals who seemed to tolerate a presence like her. She was just a pebble on the side of the road. Katsuki thought back to a time when the two of them were younger, a time before that parasite of a brother of hers had come along to ruin it all. Flashback, many years ago in the middle of the woods, with 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and Katsuki. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and Katsuki had been friends for as long as they could remember. Their mothers were friends, and as such, playdates and dinners were common among the two families. To say the two were childhood friends might be an understatement. The two had been practically inseparable. That was until Katsuki's quirk developed. One day, the two had been going on an adventure. Katsuki's quirk had already awakened by this point, and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 simply followed the blonde boy around like an obedient puppy, smiling and praising the boy all the while. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, 5 years old, your quirk's so cool, Kaken, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said, walking behind Katsuki, who was carrying a fishing net. I hope I get mine soon too. Katsuki, 5 years old, no matter what quirk you get, you'll never beat me. Katsuki retorted playfully, looking over his shoulder at the shy girl, his best friend. Present, Katsuki, just a pebble. Katsuki thought as he gritted his teeth and stared at the girl, sitting on the side of the road. SHADOWS. Third-person POV, about an hour later on the PE field. With Class 1A and 𝗬𝗏, the class had completed the rest of the tests. Most had tired themselves out before the long-distance run, and as such it turned into the most difficult test for the class. The only one who seemed to have no issues was Ida. The boy seemed to enjoy the run, in fact. After hearing 𝗬𝗏 blow the whistle that denoted the end of the distance run, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 collapsed onto the dirt. Attempting to catch her breath, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 lay on the ground and took short and shallow breaths. Her doubts were getting the better of her as her mind had also begun to register the pain from her broken finger once again. Gritting her teeth and getting up, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 joined the rest of her classmates as they watched and waited for the fateful moment that would determine whose dream would be forever crushed under the scrutiny of the underground hero standing before them. 𝗬𝗏, okay, I'll quickly tell you the results. 𝗬𝗏 announced, looking at the students standing in front of him as they looked at him expectantly. The total is simply the marks you got from each test compiled, and then sorted from highest to lowest, obviously. 𝗬𝗏 pulled out the smartphone-like device from his jumpsuit pocket and clicked a button on its screen. It's a waste of time to explain verbally, so I'll show you the results all at once. The class stood, watching nervously as 𝗬𝗏 clicked a button and a hologram appeared in front of them. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, the person with the lowest total score will be expelled. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 thought as she shut her eyes, fear and self-doubt gripping her. The pain in her finger continued to throb, which didn't make her thought process any clearer. The only result I had that was really any good was the ball throw. For the other tests, I did terribly because of the pain and the restraint on my use of one for all. The screen displayed the names and ranks of the 21 students present in Class 1A. Each of the students carefully pored over the list, searching frantically for their names and praying that they wouldn't be in last place. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 opened her eyes slowly as she looked down the list of names. Finding Izuku settled comfortably in 10th place, her eyes continued to drift down the names until she found her own. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, Then last is, settled in last place 𝗬𝗵𝗲, expelled. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 thought in horror, her eyes widening in panic. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 lowered her head and looked at her clenched fist. The sting of tears burned the corners of her eyes as she felt her world crumbling around her. Beep. 𝗳𝗲𝗄, by the way, 𝗳𝗲𝗄 said, his voice deadpan, I was lying about the expulsion. Most of Class 1A stared at the man, dumbfounded. 𝗳𝗲𝗄, it was an irrational deception to draw out the upper limits of your quirks? 𝗳𝗲𝗄 announced, smiling at the assembled group of prospective heroes. Class 1A, 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝗃 and 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗏. 𝗳𝗲𝗄𝗂, of course that was a lie. A tall girl, named 𝗳𝗲𝗄𝗃 𝗵𝗃𝗃, with dark black hair in a ponytail and sharp analytical eyes that gave an air of superiority to her, spoke up. It should have been obvious if you just thought it through. Class 1A, 𝗧𝗵𝗃, I didn't notice, the group thought as they stared at the girl. 𝗬𝗲, that was a little nerve-wracking. 𝗬𝗲𝗵𝗃𝗲, the boy with slicked-back black hair and oddly shaped elbows, spoke. Looking at some nearby students. 𝗵𝗃, I'll take up the challenge anytime. 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃, a red-headed boy, spoke as he clenched his fist with confidence. 𝗳𝗲𝗄, with that, we're done here. 𝗳𝗲𝗄 said, dismissing the group. There are handouts with the curriculum and such in the classroom, go there and grab them if you want. So when you go back, look over them. 𝗳𝗲𝗄 began walking away from the group, leaving them to their own devices. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 let out a sigh of relief but tensed up as she heard her name called. 𝗳𝗲𝗄, 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃, 𝗳𝗲𝗄 said, looking at the girl, have the old lady fix you in the nurse's office? 𝗳𝗲𝗄 handed 𝗬𝗵𝗲 a slip of paper before continuing to walk away. Tomorrow will be packed with even more rigorous tests. Prepare yourselves. 𝗬𝗵𝗲 looked down at the note in her hand. Her eyes softened as her body relaxed once again. 𝗬𝗵𝗲, I got through this for now, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 thought to herself, but there was still too much that I couldn't do. I'm starting from last place, I have a lot to learn from here on out in order to get closer to what I dream of being. 𝗧𝗵𝗃, what? 𝗧𝗵𝗃 thought to himself, the turn of events was shocking even to him. Rational deception. Is that what he calls lying now? 𝗧𝗵𝗃 turned to look at 𝗬𝗵𝗲 before following where 𝗳𝗲𝗄 was walking. He could see a figure lurking behind the corner of the nearby gymnasium. A large figure. 𝗧𝗵𝗃, all might. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 thought. Third-person POV. A few moments later behind the gymnasium, with All Might and 𝗳𝗲𝗄. All Might, 𝗳𝗲𝗄, you liar. All Might said, staring at the shaggy man passing by. 𝗳𝗲𝗄, All Might, 𝗳𝗲𝗄 said as he looked over his shoulder, unenthused at the man's presence. So you were watching? Too much time on your hands? 𝗳𝗲𝗄 asked, looking away from the massive man in a bright yellow pinstripe suit. All Might, a rational deception you said? All Might asked, continuing to stare at 𝗳𝗄𝗄. April Fool's was last week. You punished a whole class of last year's first years with expulsion. All Might said, revealing that he had found 𝗳𝗄𝗄's record in the teaching directory. You cut those you judged to be without potential, without hesitation. For a man like that to take back his word, All Might let the statement hang in the air before he pointed at 𝗳𝗄𝗄 and finished it. That must be because you also felt the potential of that girl, right? 𝗳𝗄𝗄, also? 𝗳𝗄𝗄 asked, turning to look at the blonde idiot with a smirk on his face. You seem to be supporting her quite a bit. Is that really how a teacher should be acting? 𝗳𝗄𝗄 asked as he turned away. Her potential was not zero, 𝗳𝗄𝗄 said as he began to walk away from All Might. That's all it was. I will always cut those without potential. There's nothing crueler than letting a dream end midway. 𝗳𝗄𝗄 said, his voice growing serious. All Might, so you're being kind in your own way, huh, 𝗳𝗄𝗄? All Might muttered as he watched the dark-haired man continue to walk away. But we don't really get along at all after all. At the end of the day outside of UA's main building on the walkway, with 𝗧𝗵𝗃 and 𝗬𝗵𝗲 the two greenettes were making their way toward home, walking along the red brick walkway that led from the front gates to the large H-shaped building. 𝗬𝗵𝗲's feet dragged against the walkway as she lethargically trudged along, with 𝗧𝗵𝗃 keeping pace with her. 𝗬𝗵𝗃, I'm so tired, 𝗬𝗵𝗃 muttered as she continued to push her body forward, despite the waves of lethargia coming from what seemed to be nowhere. Izumi was stopped in her tracks as she felt a solid and tight grip on her shoulder. Turning over her shoulder to look behind her at the person who had grabbed her, she found herself face to face with Tenya Ida, one of the people she wanted to interact with the least. Izumi, Ida-kun. Izumi said, surprised. Izumi's voice drew Izuku's attention, who also stopped walking and looked at the bespectacled boy. Ida, is your finger healed? Ida asked stiffly. Izumi, yeah, thanks to Recovery Girl. Izumi responded affirmatively, displaying the bandaged finger for Ida to see. Although it was really weird. Izumi thought as she recalled her visit to Recovery Girl in the nurse's office. Flashback, a few hours earlier in the UN nurse's office, with Izumi and Recovery Girl Chu. The sound of a kiss being planted could be heard echoing throughout the office. Izumi squirmed in discomfort at the sensation of the older woman's puckered lips making contact with her skin. But that feeling was quickly overtaken by the sudden relief of pain from her finger. Izumi, wow, it's healed. Izumi said, watching as the lemon-colored energy dissipated from her index finger, leaving the once broken and discolored digit in its uninjured state. But suddenly I feel very tired, Izumi complained. Recovery Girl, my quirk can only 𝗬𝗵𝗲 a person's natural healing ability, but healing requires stamina. Recovery Girl explained, if you keep getting major injuries, you'll use too much stamina and end up dying instead, so be careful. Recovery Girl pulled out a small Pez dispenser with 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗃 head on it and popped out a small chalky candy for Izumi. Izumi, I'll end up dying instead. Izumi shouted, shocked and afraid. Present, outside of Yuye, on the walkway, with Izuku, Izumi, and Ida Izumi, I can't just keep getting help from others. Izumi thought to herself as she clenched her fist in determination. I have to hurry up and learn to control my power. The trio of Izumi, Ida, and Izuku had resumed their casual pace. Continuing toward the main gate of the school, Ida began to ponder something out loud. Ida, I really was taken aback by Aizawa-sensei, Ida said, resting a hand on his chin. I even thought, this is the best of the best, and such. I didn't think a teacher would encourage us with a lie. Izumi, I thought Ida-kun was scary, but he's just earnest, Izumi thought as she looked at the blue-haired boy. Izuku, that's because he didn't, Izuku replied simply. Ida and Izumi looked at the boy, but before they could ask any questions they were cut off by a shout from a familiar, bubbly voice. Achiko, hey! Achiko shouted, getting the attention of the trio. You three. Are you guys going to the station? Achiko jogged slightly to catch up with the small group, shouting, wait for me. Izuku, Izuku hemmed curiously as he looked at the girl. Izumi, Uraraka-san, the greenette turned to look at the girl approaching. Ida, you're the Infinity Girl, Ida said as Achiko came to a stop. Achiko, I'm Uraraka Achiko, Achiko said, smiling at the three students. I'm your Ida Tenya, Achiko said, looking at the bespectacled boy. Your Midoriya Izuku, Izumi said, looking at the green-haired boy who was slightly flushed. And your Midoriya Deku, right? Achiko said, looking at Izumi and smiling innocently. Izumi and Izuku, Deku? Both said, Izumi a bit embarrassed at the nickname and Izuku chuckled under his breath at the misunderstanding. Achiko, huh? Achiko said, confused, but during the fitness test, the boy named Bakugo said, Deku, you idiot, right? Izumi, my real name is Izumi, Izumi responded, growing even more embarrassed, but Deku is what Kaken calls me to make fun of mean Ida, an insult. Ida asked, looking at Izumi. Izuku, kinda, Izuku muttered, answering for the girl. Achiko, oh, is that right? Achiko said, embarrassed about her mistake. Sorry. Achiko apologized as she scratched the back of her head, but Deku sounds like the Japanese word for you can do it? Achiko said, looking at Izumi. So I kinda liked it. Izumi, oh well, I'm Deku then. Izumi responded, seeing the once insulting name in a new light. Ida, Midoriya-chan. Ida asked, surprised about the sudden shift in the girl's demeanor. Izuku, wow, I guess Izumi made at least one friend. Izuku thought, a subtle smile gracing his lips as he watched the interaction. Ida, you're accepting it too easily. Ida tried to reason with the green-haired girl. Wasn't that an insult? 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲, it's like a Copernican revolution, 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 said, looking away from Ida bashfully. 𝗳𝗃𝗁𝗁𝗃𝗁? Achiko asked, confused about what 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 was talking about. The group of four began to walk down the hill toward the train station in Mustafu, in Achiko and Ida's case, or home, as was the case for Izuku and 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲. The large hill gave them an appealing sight to walk home with, looking out over the vast and glittering ocean in the distance. Only covered by the skyline of Mustafu. 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲, there are so many things that I can't do, 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲 thought to herself as she listened to Ida and Achiko talking to one another. I have to work hard and do my best. But, All Might, I can at least be happy that I have friends now, right? 𝗬𝗃𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁 looks happy, Izuku thought to himself as he watched his sister from the corner of his eyes as she began to engage with the other two who were walking with them. I'm glad. I know that today could have gone very differently, but the Tobo obviously saw something in her with her throw, since her other scores were absolutely abysmal or average. He wasn't bluffing about expelling whoever came in last, he just changed his mind about his assessment of 𝗬𝗍𝗵𝗲. Izuku began to stare ahead of them, looking out at the sparkling blue ocean in the distance. I know he can be a hard ass, but whatever it was that impressed him, I'm also impressed. It won't hurt her to make some connections, and I guess it won't hurt me either, Izuku thought with a sigh. At that same time inside the faculty office, with Toshinori stared at the red. It filled his vision as he stared absent-mindedly at the suit he held in his hands. It was one of his hero costumes. Specifically the one from his Silver Age. Toshinori watched as the spandex fabric wrinkled under his tightening grip as he gritted his teeth and sighed with stress. Toshinori, you don't have time to relax, young lady, Toshinori thought with a sigh. The real thing starts tomorrow. SHADOWS. Third-person POV. The next day inside Class 1A, with Class 1A Izuku. The UE8 High School Hero course's curriculum is as follows. Izuku repeated to himself mentally as he was trying to pass the time in class while waiting for the next teacher to arrive. Regular required classes, like English and math, are in the morning, followed by lunch in the main cafeteria, where we can buy gourmet food for reasonable prices, which Lunch Rush's food is amazing. I'm glad to be coming to UA. If not for that fact alone, Izuku thought, his cheek resting on his fist as he looked out the window. And then in the afternoon, we finally have All Might. I am All Might's voice echoed from the hallway into Class 1A, pulling everyone's attention to the door and interrupting Izuku's train of thought. Coming through the door like a normal person, All Might shouted as he opened the door and leaned inside, definitely not like a normal person. Gasps of surprise and awe resound throughout the classroom as the students of 1A look to their front and watch as the large blonde man strides into the room, in a comically confident way. Kaminari, it's All Might. Kaminari said in awe. Kirishima, wow, he really is a teacher. Kirishima said, excitement dripping from his voice. Azui, that's a costume from the Silver Age, isn't it? The frog girl, Azui Tsuyu, asked with a finger on her chin. Ojiro, its style is so different, it's giving me goosebumps. Ojiro said, his voice trembling slightly. All Might, I teach hero basic training. All Might announced once he made it to the podium at the front of the room. It is a subject where you train in different ways to learn the basics of being a hero. Most of your education is made up of units of this subject. All Might explained, to which most of the students nodded in understanding or anticipation. Let's get right into it. This is what we'll do today. All Might paused for dramatic effect as he flexed and showed off his muscular form. Combat training. Katsuki, combat, Katsuki said, his excitement growing exponentially. Izumi, training, Izumi muttered, concerned about the reaction of the blonde boy sitting in front of her. All Might, and to go with that, are these? All Might announced as he pressed a button on a small remote he held in his hands. From the wall popped shelves with suitcases on them. The cases displayed numbers, ranging from 1 to 21, based on the number of students in the class. All Might, costumes made based on your Quirk registrations and the requests you sent in before school started. All Might continued, his voice remaining as loud and booming as it was when he entered the room. The class gasped in delight and awe at their new costumes. Excited about the training, the students quickly got up from their seats and grabbed their cases from the shelves on the wall. Izuku, costumes, Izuku muttered, looking at Izumi from the corner of his eyes as he stood up from his seat to collect his case. All Might, after you change, gather at ground beta. All Might gave the order, giving the students their task to complete and the place to meet for the upcoming lesson. Class 1A, yes, sir, the students responded excitedly. A little while later at Fake City Beta, with All Might stood near the entrance the students were going to use to come into the fake urban setting. Standing dressed and ready, All Might took the last few seconds he had to prepare using his flashcards that he put together at the last minute. All Might's attention was drawn away from his preparations as he heard footsteps echoing down the long corridor that led the students into the fake city. All Might could see the figures of his students coming into the light and the costumes they were wearing. Some of the costumes seemed more elaborate or flashy, while others maintained a more reserved and casual look. All Might, they say the clothes make the man, young men, and ladies. All Might spoke to the group as they entered the light of day, giving him a good look at their costumes. Be fully aware that from now on, All Might paused for dramatic effect. You are heroes. Looking at the assembled group, All Might counted 20 students, meaning one hadn't come out of the corridor yet. The assembled group of students had all manner of accessories and bright colors in their costumes. Most seemed to have the common trait of being made of some sort of spandex jumpsuit with other pieces worn on top. All Might, that's great everyone. All look so cool. All Might exclaimed. Now, shall we begin you? SHADOWS. Izumi's POV. The clothing allowance before we enrolled in UH, we submitted our quirk registration, physical measurements, and desired designs. From there, a support company under exclusive contract with the school prepares a state-of-the-art costume for us. It's a wonderful system. 3 weeks before the start of the spring semester in the Midoriya household, with Izumi and Inko, I was sitting at the coffee table in the living room while looking over the information I needed to submit after receiving my acceptance letter from Izumi. I need to go to City Hall to get my quirk registration for the clothing allowance. I said to myself, looking at the packet of papers and forms I had spread out in front of me. Wait, but I'm already registered as none, I thought out loud, gasping at my unforeseen mistake. What should I do? I wondered before pulling out my phone. I quickly called the only person I could think of for help. All Might. Toshinori, quirk registration. Toshinori asked, listening to the girl's concerns as he sat in the faculty office at UA, trying to get things in order for when the term started. Oh, you can update that. Izumi, really? I asked, surprised at how easy it was. Toshinori, everyone is examined and registered all at once when they enter elementary school and junior high, right? Toshinori said with a chuckle, but there are cases where people discover that their quirks aren't what they once thought they were. So you're allowed to update it once or twice. They won't accept outrageous changes though. But if you had none before, then it's probably fine. And by probably, I mean I'm sure. Toshinori explained to the girl but was cut off when Izumi accidentally hung up the phone after being startled by another voice in the house. Inko, I'm home. Inko called out into the house, announcing her arrival. Izumi, oh no. I hung up by accident. I said, panicked as I looked at the phone displaying the call-ended screen. I'll have to apologize later, I thought as I put my phone back in my pocket. Looking at the door to the living room, I said, welcome back, as I saw my mother enter the living room. Inko, hey, Izumi, she said with a smile as she reached into the bag she was carrying. Congrats on getting into UH. My mom shouted as she whipped out a bright turquoise jumpsuit with white accent lining the sleeves, torso, and I might have jumped to conclusions, though. Izumi, a jumpsuit? I asked, standing from the sofa and looking at my mother. Inko, it's not much as it is now, though, she said, her voice a little dejected. When you doze off while studying, I happened to see your notebook. Izumi, I asked, surprised and embarrassed. Inko, the terrible thing I said as your mother kept bothering me. I gave up back then, she admitted, turning her eyes away in defeat. But you didn't give up. You kept chasing your dream, didn't you? Even when Izuku came to join our family and our life, my expression softened as I looked at her mother. The tears hanging in the corners of the older woman's eyes served as a testament to the shame that she felt for having given up on me so easily in the past. Inko, I'm sorry, Izumi, my mom said, reaching out her hands holding the jumpsuit, but I'll support you openly with everything I've got from now on. I reached out and grabbed the jumpsuit from my mother's hands, looking at it and smiling. Izumi, these are my mother's feelings, I thought to myself. Third-person POV. 3 weeks later inside Fake City Beta, with Class 1A and All Might Izumi, what'll I wear if not this? Izumi thought to herself as her red sneakers impacted the concrete beneath her, propelling her body forward toward the rest of the class who had finished getting ready a few minutes earlier and had already made their way to the city. Even if it's not the most convenient or state-of-the-art, it's fine. This is my costume. Izumi thought as she made it into the sunlight. Achiko, oh, Deku-chan, Achiko said, turning over her shoulder and looking at the late arrival. Izumi, Uraraka-san. Izumi responded, looking at the girl. Achiko, that looks cool. Achiko praised Izumi's costume. Izuku, it's really down to earth. Izuku's voice could be heard from nearby. Both girls turned to look at Izuku, who had taken a few steps toward them. The boy was wearing what looked like a deep, navy blue two-piece jumpsuit. The seam to flare out before coming to a taper at the ankle, tucked neatly into the high-top two-tone sneakers Izuku wore for his footwear. The jacket seemed to have a hood connected to a relatively high collar, the golden buttons on the collar of the jacket keeping it standing and near his face. A/N, I don't have an image as of right now, I'm sorry. Imagine Megumi's Jujutsu Tech uniform with a hood on it. That's essentially Izuku's hero costume. As Izuku looked at Uraraka's costume, a slight blush formed on his cheeks as he felt his heart pick up the pace. Achiko's costume was a form-fitting unitard with large bracelets around her wrists and a large belt around her waist. It was made of a black, white, and pink color scheme which looked good on the brunette. Achiko, you look really good too, Izuku. You're also pretty toned down. Achiko responded to the boy's approach and complimented his costume as well. I should have written down what I wanted. Mine ended up being a skin-tight bodysuit. Achiko rubbed the back of her head in embarrassment as she felt Izuku's eyes on her. It's a little embarrassing. Mineta, the hero course is the best, Mineta muttered from nearby. Izuku hummed in a slightly disgusted shock. Looking at the small, purple boy. A slight tremor went through All Might's body as he saw Izumi's costume. Noticing the similarities between the girl's aesthetic choices and his own appearance, All Might could only cover his mouth and look away to avoid making it too obvious to the other students. All Might, so obvious, All Might thought to himself. Recentering his focus, All Might began to speak. Now, it's time for combat training. Ida, sensei. Ida, who was dressed in a full suit of armor that left room for his exhaust pipes to port from his calves, raised a hand and asked sharply. Izumi, oh, that was Ida-kun. Izumi thought as she looked at the boy standing next to her. He sure looks cool. Ida, this is a battle center from the entrance exam, Ida questioned. So will we be conducting urban battles again? All Might answered, beginning to explain to the students, we're going to move ahead 2 steps. Most of the time, fighting villains takes place outside, but if you look at the total numbers, All Might lectured the class. Atrocious villains appear indoors at a higher rate. Imprisonment, house arrest, backroom deals, All Might listed examples for the group of heroes in training. In this society filled with heroes, truly intelligent villains hide in the shadows. For this class, you'll be split into villains and heroes and fight 2-on-2 indoor battles. Since Class 1A has 21 students, one of the groups will have 3 members. Azui, without basic training. Azui asked the large, blonde hero, concerned for the safety of herself and her classmates. All Might, this is a real battle to understand those basics. All Might said confidently, grasping his fist in front of him. However, the key this time is that there's no robot you can just beat up. Yaoyorozu, how will wins and losses be determined? Yaoyorozu, the girl with the dark black hair and air of esteem, asked. Katsuki, can we just beat them up anyway? Katsuki asked, ignoring the nature of his question and the stares he got as a response. Achiko, will the punishment be expulsion like with Aizawa-sensei? Achiko asked, wringing her hands together in concern. Ida, how shall we be split up? Ida asked as he raised his hand once again. Aoyama, isn't this cape crazy? Aoyama asked. The question had absolutely nothing to do with what was going on at the moment, he just wanted to show off. All Might, I'll answer all your questions. All Might said, trying to quell the overwhelming amount of questions being thrown at him, all at once. Reaching into a pocket and pulling out a small folded and stapled bundle of paper, All Might began to read. All Might, now listen here. All Might announced, clearing his throat as he opened the small script he had prepared. Izumi, a script. Izumi noted quickly as All Might began to recite what was written. All Might, the situation is, the villains have hidden a nuclear weapon somewhere in their hideout. The heroes are trying to dispose of that weapon. The heroes must catch the villains or get to the nuclear weapon back within the allotted time. The villains must protect the weapon for the whole time or catch the heroes. All Might explained. Izuku, this situation feels very American. Izuku thought to himself sardonically. All Might, teams and opponents will be determined by drawing lots. All Might announced as he held up a box with the word lots written on it. Ida, they're being decided so haphazardly. Ida asked, almost in protest at the lack of preparation that went into this exercise. Izumi, pros often have to create makeshift teams with heroes from other agencies, Izumi stated matter-of-factly, so maybe that's why. Ida, I see, Ida responded, beginning to think critically about the situation, the discernment to look so far ahead. Ida then bowed and said sharply, please excuse my rudeness. All Might, it's fine. Let's do this quickly. All Might responded. The students each stepped up and grabbed a ball from the box. On each ball was a letter, which everyone besides Izuku got. Izuku, being the 21st student, picked from a separate box of lots which gave him his team. Paired up with Team A, which was comprised of Izumi and Achiko, Izuku couldn't help but sigh. Izuku, while I don't have any issues with this team, it's definitely going to be awkward. Izuku thought to himself as he looked at his teammates. Achiko, wow, it must be fate. Achiko said, excited about who her two teammates were, I'm counting on you too. Izumi, yeah? Izumi replied, her nerves getting the better of her. Izuku, seriously? Izuku said, his eyes widening as Achiko leaned in close to him and smiled. I have to speak properly, like a normal human being or else, Izuku thought to himself, getting unusually flustered by Achiko's presence. All Might. Now then, All Might said as he dug both his hands through two boxes. One labeled villain and the other labeled hero. The first teams to fight will be All Might pulled two balls containing letters on them and announced the teams, these guys. All Might held up two balls. One showed the letter, while the other showed the letter. Izumi let out a slightly startled gasp and Katsuki, who was standing nearby, grunted in slight satisfaction. All Might, Team A will be the heroes, and Team D will be the villains. All Might announced. Everyone else, head toward the monitor room. Class 1A, yes, sir, the class responded in unison. Izumi lowered her head as she listened to the sounds of shuffling feet around her. The other students were making their way toward the monitor room as they were ordered, while she and her teammates, as well as the opposing team, remained. Looking from the corner of her eyes at Katsuki, one of the students on Team D, Izumi gulped nervously. Katsuki was staring at her. Katsuki was going to do everything in his power to hurt Izumi, and she knew it. If looks could kill, then she would have dropped dead then and there. Quickly looking away, Izumi let out a small sigh, hoping for the best. Izuku walked past her, toward the building they would be using for their mock battle, and placed a hand on her shoulder for just a moment. Izumi looked at her brother and nodded, clenching her fist by her side as she steeled her resolve. Turning to return Katsuki's spiteful gaze with one of determination, Izumi looked at Katsuki, causing the boy to be just a little taken aback. Katsuki gasped in surprise before he gritted his teeth and restrained a snarl from escaping his throat. A few minutes later, outside of the large building, with Team A, Team D, And All Might, villain team, go in first and set up. All Might announced as the group of students had arrived at the building that would be used for the first battle. In 5 minutes, the hero team will break in and the battle will start. Team A and Team D. Yes, sir, the students responded affirmatively. All Might, young Ida, young Bakugo, All Might said as the Toon villains began to enter the building. Learn to think from the perspective of the villains. This is pretty close to a real battle. Go all out and don't be afraid to get hurt. Ida, yes sir. Ida responded. All Might, if things go too far, I will stop it. All Might warned, looking at the two boys as they entered the building. Ida, yes sir. Ida responded affirmatively, once again. Katsuki gritted his teeth, enraged as he looked at Izumi's back. About a minute later inside the mock battle building, with Ida and Katsuki. Ida, even if this is training, Ida said aloud, walking toward the bomb, it pains me to become a villain. Ida had gotten to the large object, reaching out and striking it with his knuckles. So our job is to protect this. It's papier-mâché. Katsuki, hey. Katsuki called for Ida's attention but wasn't looking at the blue-haired boy. Deku has a quirk, right? Katsuki said, staring at the door, his shoulders and back muscle tensed from his rage. Ida, you saw that extraordinary strength, didn't you? Ida responded, looking at the blonde boy, unaware of the deeper meaning of his question. It appears to carry a lot of risk, though however, you seem to be especially angry when it comes to Midoriya-chan, or either of the Miradriyas for that matter. Katsuki had stopped listening. The sound of Ida's voice became distant as he began to stew and drown in his seething rage and hatred for the two green-haired siblings. Katsuki's shoulders tremble with rage as he begins to spiral into his own madness. Katsuki, did she dare to trick me? Katsuki thought, his rage growing exponentially. That demon nerd. Outside of the building, with Team A Achiko, it's a lot of work to memorize the building's floor plan. Achiko said, looking at the sheet they had been given to use as a prep guide. But All Might is just the same as when he's on TV. Unlike Aizawa-sensei, it looks like there's no punishment, Achiko said, turning to look at the green-haired girl standing to her left, so we can relax. And Achiko then saw how desperately nervous Izumi was. Achiko, you're not relaxed at all. Achiko said, concerned for the girl. Izuku, yeah, it's probably because we're up against Katsuki. Izuku said, stepping up to Achiko's right side. Izumi, and there's Ida-kun too. So I feel like I need to be on guard, Izumi continued, not necessarily acknowledging that Izuku was correct, but not denying it either. Achiko, I see. Achiko said, looking back at Izumi, Bakugo's the one who makes fun of you, right? Izumi, he's amazing, Izumi said, sighing dejectedly. Izuku, here it comes, Izuku thought to himself with a sigh. Izumi, he's a piece of work, Izumi said, stuttering slightly as a light blush tinged her cheeks pink, but his goal, his confidence, his physical strength, and his quirk, they're all way more amazing than mine. But that's why right now, Izumi said, standing straight and looking toward the building with determination in her eyes, I don't want to lose Izuku. I'll ignore the blushing for now, because I'm glad she's finally willing to start standing up for herself. Izuku thought as he looked at Izumi. Achiko looked, dumbfounded, at Izumi for a moment before she smiled and nodded her head, stealing her own resolve in response to Izumi's display of confidence. Achiko, a fated battle between lovers? Achiko asked, looking at Izumi. Izuku, a what? Izuku thought as he tried to stop himself from laughing. Izumi, Oh, sorry, this isn't your problem, Uraraka-san. Izumi said, realizing she had been thinking out loud for the past few moments, and now Achiko had perceived something that wasn't there. Achiko, it is. We're a team, aren't we? Achiko asked, looking at the girl waving her hands in embarrassment. Let's do our best. Izuku, she's right, Izumi. We're a team, so let's do our best. Izuku said, looking at Izumi with a small smile on his face. The blush on Izuku's face didn't go unnoticed by Izumi either, as she looked at her brother in confusion for a moment. Before Izumi could actually reach a conclusion, All Might's voice echoed throughout the area from the PA system set up in the fake city. All Might, Now, let's start the indoor, person-to-person combat training with Team A and Team D inside the monitor room, with the rest of Class 1A and All Might All Might. Okay everyone, you should all think as well. And pay close attention. All Might lectured the students who stood behind him. Everyone was watching the large screen showing multiple feeds from CCTV cameras positioned within the building. All Might, young Midoriya here, you are no more than a single student. All Might thought to himself as he placed a communicator into his ear. I will grade you strictly, without playing favorites, inside the 𝗬𝗵𝗃 battle building, with Team A. Izumi had managed to open a window and slip inside. Quickly standing up and checking her surroundings, Izumi noticed the area was clear. Achiko and Izuku followed quickly after. Achiko, we've infiltrated successfully. Achiko whispered. Izuku, there are a lot of bling spots, so be careful. Izuku said quietly, his voice remained just above a whisper. The two girls nod in agreement and the trio begins to move quietly and carefully through the halls of the building. Its empty, gray tiles help the corridors to appear uniform and completely indistinguishable from one another. The trio continued to make their way through the first floor. Each of the members of Team A was watching each corner and over their shoulders as they advanced. In an attempt to be extra cautious, Izuku had quietly summoned 𝗬𝗵𝗲, the black divine dog, who was settled near the boy and on alert for any changes in scent or atmosphere. Izuku, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 will let us know if anyone is trying to sneak up on us, Izuku whispered to his teammates, informing them of the support they had at their disposal. Nodding in acknowledgement, the trio continued to venture deeper into the maze-like network of identical hallways. Izumi, I still can't control one for all, Izumi thought to herself as she attempted to strategize with the situation at hand. So I can't use it against anyone. If I were to use it against someone, it'll kill them. So we'll just have to do it with what power I have now, Izuku's shadows, and Uraraka-san's zero gravity. I've got to use my head. Izumi continued to think as she took point for the trio, leading them around with her basic knowledge of indoor combat situations from her vast amounts of hours spent researching heroes and how they do their work. Remember, those notes on indoor battles in tight spaces, remember. Izumi thought to herself. As the trio rounded a corner and began to approach a T-intersection hallway, 𝗬𝗵𝗲 began to let out a low, rumbling growl. Izumi let out a gasp as she looked ahead of them and saw the blonde figure of Bakugo Katsuki quickly jettisoning out from the corner. Izuku reached out to grab Achiko and pull her out of the blast radius as Izumi jumped backward to dodge Katsuki's massive attack. The trio had managed to avoid the blast from the blonde villain, however not unscathed. As the smoke cleared, Izuku and Achiko could see Izumi, who was standing close by, had half of the upper face mask of her costume torn off, leaving half of her face exposed and allowing some of the green curls to escape the tight fabric of the jumpsuit. Izumi, Uraraka-san, are you all right? Izumi asked, unable to look at her teammates behind her as she watched the billowing smoke in front of them, searching for Katsuki in the massive cloud of black smoke. Achiko, yeah, thanks, Achiko said, looking at Izuku's hand gripping her arm. Izuku, Izumi, be careful? Izuku shouted, allowing 𝗬𝗵𝗲 to position himself in front of the three of them, standing ready to defend them if Katsuki attempted to rush at them using the cover of the smoke. Achiko, Deku-chan, Achiko said, concerned for the green-haired girl who had been hit by the blonde boy's attack. Izumi, it's just a scratch, Izumi said, reassuring Achiko and Izuku that she was fine. The trio's attention returned to the smoke as they heard the sound of rubble hitting the floor. After a moment, the smoke was swiped away by a swift hand movement from Katsuki. The blonde boy was standing in the middle of their path forward, staring at the trio. Or more specifically Izumi. SHADOWS. Third-person POV, inside the mock battle building, with Team A and Katsuki. Come on, Deku. Don't dodge. Katsuki said, challenging the girl standing in front of him. Katsuki could see the large black wolf standing between him and the trio, and the boy wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what that wolf was capable of doing to him. He had seen Izuku use the two of them before. Katsuki was smarter than to charge in blindly. He would allow Izumi to send the two away like he knew she would. Izumi, I figured you'd come for me first, 𝗂𝗂𝗵𝗲 said, looking at the blonde boy with defiance. Inside the monitor room, with the rest of Class 1A and 𝗵𝗃𝗵𝗃, a surprise attack from the starts. Mineta asked, shocked at what he just watched. 𝗵𝗃𝗵𝗃 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃, a surprise attack. That's cheating. 𝗵𝗃𝗵𝗃 said, indignant at the underhanded tactics Katsuki was willing to employ in this mock battle. A surprise attack isn't manly at all. All might, but a surprise attack is a strategy too, young 𝗵𝗃𝗵𝗃. All Might responded to the boy without diverting his attention from the screens in front of him. They're in the middle of a real battle right now. Ashido, Midori-chan avoided it. Ashido Mina, the girl with pink skin and horns, spoke excitedly as she watched the events that unfolded on the screens in front of them. Kaminari, they're not doing anything. Wait. There goes Bakugo. Kaminari shouted as he watched the screens closely. In the mock battle building, with Team A and Katsuki, Izuku, you goddamn parasite. Get this 𝗵𝗃𝗃 out of my way before I blow it to hell. Katsuki shouted as he began to run forward. I won't cause so much damage that this fight gets stopped, but I'm gonna get close. Katsuki continued his advance, using a small explosion from his left palm to blast himself forward and give him momentum, as well as toss Kuma, who had lunged at the blonde boy, into the nearby wall of the corridor. Now that Katsuki had managed to pass Kuma, there was nothing stopping him from getting to Izumi and putting her in her place, then going after the other two extras. Katsuki threw a large right hook, ready for it to make contact, only for it to stop before hitting anything. Shocked, Katsuki looked down and gasped when he saw that Izumi had grabbed a hold of his arm, wrapping one of her arms over and locking it into place so Katsuki couldn't get free, while her other arm wrapped around his shoulder from under his armpit, securing the boy in an arm lock. Achiko, wow, she's like a martial arts 𝗵𝗃𝗃, Achiko said, watching the skirmish take place. Izuku took the opportunity to call Kuma back into his shadow. Katsuki had hurt the black divine dog pretty bad with that explosion, and Izuku didn't want to risk the wolf getting any more injured than he already did. Izuku was sure that Katsuki didn't even consider his Shikigami to be living things that could die, and would absolutely use an overkill amount of force which would result in Kuma's death. Izumi rotated her hips and slid her feet, widening her stance and center of mass as she used her back as a point of leverage, from which she pulled Katsuki off balance. Katsuki, what? What's with this girl? Katsuki thought in a panic as he felt his body flipping over itself. Did she read my moves? Katsuki attempted to use his quirk to adjust his positioning and right himself before things could get out of hand. With a loud battle cry, Izumi threw Katsuki onto his back on the concrete ground. Using his wide right hook as the throw point, Izumi managed to redirect Katsuki's strike with a judo-style throw. Her guttural cry resounded throughout the empty corridors as Katsuki's body made contact with the ground beneath her. 𝗵𝗃𝗃. Katsuki coughed as his body smacked against the ground hard. He could feel the hit reverberate through his body as he struggled to catch his breath again. He had smacked the back of his head against the concrete as well, and may or may not have a concussion. He didn't care right now. As he was laid on the cold tile floor of the corridor, he could hear Izumi wheezing above him as she looked down at him. Izumi, 𝗂𝗂𝗵𝗃𝗃 said, still struggling to manage her breathing as the adrenaline coursed through her body, filling every nerve ending with a tingling feeling. You usually start with a big right swing, Izumi said as she looked at the blonde boy, who was beginning to sit up. How much do you think I've been watching you? Katsuki, Izuku, and Achiko looked at Izumi as she spoke. Katsuki began to seethe with rage once again as he listened to the girl's voice. Achiko watched, impressed at the maneuver Izumi just pulled off, while Izuku simply observed Izumi's progress, proud of his sister and the fruits of her efforts coming to light. Izumi, I wrote an analysis for all the heroes I thought were amazing in my notebook, Izumi said. She still hadn't looked at the others who were in the corridor with her. Izumi's eyes were glued to her feet for the moment. As she continued to speak, it was in the notebook you blew up and threw away. Katsuki gritted his teeth as Izumi finally looked up from the ground, staring at him with a level of defiance he hadn't seen from her before. It him off, as he stared at the fiery passion burning in her eyes and as he listened to the strong determination in her voice. "Izumi, my Deku isn't always going to mean useless?" Izumi shouted, looking at the blonde boy who was still seated on the concrete tile. "Kaken my Deku means you can do it?" Izuku heard Ochako gasp. He looked at the girl beside him as her eyes widened in response to what Izumi had said. Ochiko's words were able to have an active impact on Izumi, and Ochako had been able to witness it firsthand. Ochako remembered the smile and the way Izumi's face brightened when Ochako had said that yesterday. It was almost as if it had never even crossed the green-haired girl's mind before. Ochako and Izuku watched from nearby as Katsuki got back to his feet. Completely ignoring Izuku and Ochako, Katsuki turned his full attention to Izumi as he leaned forward and clenched his fists. "Katsuki, dead," Katsuki said, the loathing and hatred clear in his voice. Katsuki thought back to a simpler time. When he and Izumi were children. When he had a quirk and Izumi didn't. When he truly stood at the top. He could hear Izumi's high-pitched voice crying out in defense of another weakling child who had stuck his nose into Katsuki's business. That same weak little girl was now standing in front of him once again. But the only difference this time was that she wasn't shaking out of fear. No, Izumi was gritting her teeth and readying herself to truly fight back and stand up for herself. "Katsuki, even if you're scared," Katsuki seethed as explosions popped in his palms. "That's what I hate about you," Katsuki shouted, his voice cracking with anger and rage. SHADOWS. Shadows, 2 tenths, divine dogs, 2 wolves, 1 white and 1 black, which manifest from the wielder's shadow. Summoned by performing a wolf hand seal, or shadow puppet. Both are capable of tearing humans and animals apart with their fangs and devouring them. Each of the dogs can detect enemies and items and notify their emissary when one is close. Their tracking abilities allow them to find lost allies and locations as well. New, a winged Shikigami armed with great speed and electric shock wings. Summoned by performing a bird hand seal, or shadow puppet. It can support its MSTR by carrying them while flying to increase their mobility and can attack with its heavy wings charged with electricity, shocking anyone it hits and leaving them temporarily paralyzed. It's especially effective for taking opponents posted in high places off guard or in combination attacks with other Shikigami. In addition to basic offensive applications, New speed and wings can also be used defensively to shield its MSTR from harm.